Committee will reconvene. Mr. Hayward, during the last series of votes, I was approached by several members of the committee who are extremely frustrated with your lack of candor and your inability to answer their questions. We initially wanted to have this hearing last week. However, your staff pleaded with the committee to give you an additional week so you could be adequately prepared for this hearing, and we agreed. In addition to the extra week we allowed you to prepare, Chairman Waxman and I sent you a 14-page letter outlining 5 issues you should be prepared to address in today's hearing. You did not address any of those issues in your opening statement, and thus far you have responded to our questions with little substance and many claims of not knowing or not being part of the decision-making processes. You've preached accepting responsibility for actions to your staff in town hall meetings, and yet you have not yet provided us with direct answers or taken responsibility thus far today. I sincerely hope that you will reconsider your approach to these questions. I hope you will be more forthcoming and less evasive with your answers for the remainder of this hearing. We are done with votes, so we should be able to get through the rest of this hearing, and we'll probably go a second round because members do want to push you on some of these issues. You're the CEO. Great experience. You got a PhD. You've been head of exploration. You know what's going on. We'd hope that we'd have more candid responses to our questions. And with that, let me turn it to Ms. Blackburn for questions. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, Mr. Hayward, we are a little bit frustrated with hearing you say you were not a party to certain decisions or were not in that chain of command or that you can't comment because of ongoing investigations. So I'm going to try a little bit different tact because I do want to get some answers and get some items get some of these questions answered. I want to go back to the safety issues. I mentioned that in my opening statement to you. I'm one of those individuals that grew up down on the Gulf Coast and then moved away. I'm familiar with people working offshore, if you will. And what I would like to know from you, have you been briefed on the safety issues and the safety concerns? And then if you were a part of the decision-making process on what would be considered the best operating practices? Were you a part of the chain of command? And what is the chain of command for dispute resolution when there's a difference about how to approach safety? Go ahead, I'd love your response.
Well, I clearly am the ultimate in the chain of command, but as I've said, I wasn't involved in the decision-making on the day.
Okay,
so
let's do this then. If you were not involved in the decision-making of how safety is approached on these rigs and platforms, would you submit to us in writing for the record a description of what that chain of command is and what the process is when there's a difference of opinion on how you approach rig safety? Would you be willing to submit that? And I will ask you and your team to submit that to us for the record. In addition, since becoming CEO, have you been briefed on the significant safety incidents that have occurred in BP's explorations, Alaskan production facilities over the past year? Have you been briefed?
I have discussed those issues at the Group Operating Risk Committee.
As a result of these briefings, did you authorize any changes to BP policies and practices for dealing with the safety incidences?
We took actions in Alaska to change both the organization and some of the processes.
Thank you. Since the Deepwater Horizon incident, have you made changes, and what are those? Will you submit those to us for the record?
We have made changes to our testing procedures on BOPs. We've made changes to the intensity with which well site leaders are aware of well control procedures, and a variety of other interventions that are predicated on what we have learnt from the incident so far. And as we learn more, we will make more changes as we deem appropriate. And I'd be very happy to submit to you, Congresswoman, the details of the changes that we've made.
Thank you. Did you ask other companies for help in cleaning up the BP oil spill? You know, last week for the hearing, we had several different companies. Did you all approach other companies or either other countries and ask for their help and their expertise in plugging that leak and in participating in the cleanup?
We've sought help from both our immediate peers and competitors in the Gulf of Mexico and globally from around the world and across America. There are several hundred entities involved in the effort. All of the major operators in this country, major operators from elsewhere in the world, such as Petrobras, many of the major academic institutions in this country, some of the greatest minds in the country are involved in trying to deal with this problem.
Did they participate at your invitation or the government's invitation?
They participated in the first instance at our invitation, and subsequently the federal authorities brought some of the great academic institutions in this country to bear.
Okay. Is BP currently working on industry-wide efforts to look at rig safety?
We have made recommendations to the MMS with respect to the things that we've learnt so far, particularly with respect to blowout preventers, and we will continue as we learn what the realities of this accident are to make our recommendations to the relevant authorities. And I believe that in the course of the coming months, the industry will work together to determine what is the best way forward.
We hope that you are working together, because I hope you understand our frustration when you have stated before safety would be a priority for BP. And we expect you all to take action on lessons learned. And when you tell us that you're taking that action and then you return because of what has occurred, Mr. Hayward, I cannot even begin to tell you how disappointing it is to us that you are saying, and you mentioned actions and words in your testimony, but sir, you are giving the rhetoric. What we want to see going forward is the action, that indeed you have learned these lessons, that BP has learned these lessons, and that you are going to share these best practices with the industry. That would be very helpful. Thank you for being before us today. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Hayward, you indicated that you made recommendations on the blowout preventer your company has. Would you provide those to this committee?
We certainly can, Chairman.
Okay. Next, let me turn to Mr. Markey for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, the existence of large clouds of or plumes of oil suspended deep beneath the ocean surface are of concern because the toxic oil and dispersants can poison the aquatic plants and animals, and they also consume oxygen, potentially asphyxiating marine life. On May 30th, you stated that your samples showed no evidence of such plumes. On June 7th, in a response to my letter, BP again denied the plumes existed, citing a BP document saying that there is no coherent body of hydrocarbons below the surface. Even after NOAA Administrator Jane Lubchenco confirmed the plume's existence on June 8th, your COO, Jeff Suttles, went on national television and continued to deny their existence. These are photographs presented to us on the committee by Dr. Samantha Joy of the University of Georgia, who has sampled the deep water of the Gulf and found such plumes. On the right, there is a filter with oil clearly present from water from within a plume as it passed by. Now, it isn't just university scientist data. I have up here on the screen as well from EPA's website entitled Subsurface Plume Detected. It was prepared using BP's data. There are 17 red dots indicating that your own data shows evidence of subsurface plumes. This is your data, Mr. Hayward. Are you now, once and for all, prepared to concede that there are plumes or clouds of oil suspended deep beneath the surface of the ocean? Yes or no, Mr. Hayward?
As I understand the data, Chairman, it indicates that there are there is oil in very low concentrations, of 0.5 parts per million, distributed through the column. The detailed analysis that NOAA have conducted in 3 locations around the spill show that in one location, 0.5 parts per million, clearly attributed to this spill.
Are there plumes of oil beneath the ocean's surface?
There are concentrations of oil of about 0.5 parts per million in the water column. Some of it is related to this spill. Other samples have been typed to other oil.
So you do not define that as a plume?
I think I'm not an oceanographic scientist. What we know is that there is
I'm going to take it as a continuing no from you, and your testimony continues to be at odds against all independent scientists. Yesterday, at the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health, during the hearing, the director of the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety told me, in answer to my question, that he has asked BP for a roster of all workers multiple times, and BP has failed to give him that information that is critical to tracking chemical exposure. Representative Eshoo and I were both outraged at BP's failure to take such a straightforward step to protect the health of their workers. Mr. Hayward, will you commit to immediately provide the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety and the Centers for Disease Control with all of the information that they need to evaluate health impacts and to protect these workers?
We've endeavoured to provide all information requests as quickly as possible, and we will endeavour to do that as well.
The head of the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety testified yesterday that you are not doing that. Will you provide all of the information that they have requested of you?
We are endeavouring to provide all the information requests that we receive, and we will certainly do it with that one.
Again, the equivocation in your answer is something that is not reassuring to those workers who potentially have been exposed to these chemicals in ways that can impact on their health. BP has dumped 30,000 gallons of drilling mud in the ocean. Drilling mud is often made using synthetic oils and other chemicals, and in this case also may have used significant quantities of antifreeze, which is toxic. Mr. Hayward, will you commit to disclosing the ingredients of the drilling mud?
Yes, we will. I believe that all of the mud that has gone into the ocean is water-based mud with no toxicity whatsoever.
Will you also commit to disclosing all other measurements you have made related to chemical, oil, and methane concentrations in the water immediately?
Those are being published as we make them on a variety of websites, and we will continue to do that. And we'll make them available in whatever form is appropriate to all of you.
And you will give us all of the measurements which you have made, is that correct?
All of the measurements we've made have been made available, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Gingrey for questions, please.
Mr. Hayward, as is demonstrated by the number of cameras in this room, interest in this hearing is at a fever pitch. The anger at BP and the anger at our administration is palpable. You just look at the polls. And we members of this committee have an obligation to get to the bottom of this to address the frustrations of the American people. The chief executive of ExxonMobil testified just yesterday at the Energy and Environment Subcommittee of this committee that, quote, we would not have drilled the well the way they did, end of quote. In addition, the president of Shell, John S. Watson, stated, I quote, it's not a well that we would have drilled in that mechanical setup, and there are operational concerns, end of quote. Mr. Hayward, my profession before Congress was the practice of medicine, obstetrics and gynecology. If I had delivered a baby that resulted in a bad outcome, a seriously bad outcome, and two of my friendly competitors, well-respected peers, said that Dr. Gingrey, in this instance, practiced below the standard of care, I would be in serious world of hurt. reflecting on the fact that two of your major competitors admitted that BP drilled the Macondo well in a non-standard way, in retrospect, what is your opinion of BP's design plan for the Macondo well?
As I've tried to explain, there are clearly some issues that our investigation has identified. And when the investigation is complete, we will draw the right conclusions. If there is at any point...
with all due respect, you've had 59 days, and you're not exactly moving with fever pitch here. Do you believe BP was drilling the well following the best safety practices you were focused on reinvigorating when you were promoted to the position of CEO a couple of years ago?
I have no reason to conclude that wasn't the case. If I found at any point that anyone in BP had put cost ahead of safety, I would take action.
Do you believe that the decisions made regarding Deepwater Horizon on and leading up to April the 20th, such as the decision to use only 6 centralizers instead of 21, the decision to not run a cement bond log, do you believe those decisions reflect the normal decision-making process at BP, or would you characterize those decisions as an exception to normal operating procedures?
There's nothing that I've seen in the evidence so far that suggests that anyone put costs ahead of safety. If there are, then we'll take action.
Well, let me put it this way, Mr. Haywood, in the remaining time that I have left. If you had been physically present on that rig, along with the 11 men that were killed, would you have made the same decisions as were made? Would you have approved the decision to use only 6 centimeters despite the recommendation to use 21? Would you have made the decision to not run a cement bond log if you had been standing on that Deepwater Horizon rig?
I'm not a drilling engineer, so I'm not actually qualified to make those judgments. Better people than I were involved in those decisions in terms of the judgments that were taken. And if our investigation determines that at any time people put costs ahead of safety, then we will take action.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Haywood, I think you're copping out. You're the captain of the ship, and it's been said by members on both sides of the aisle of this committee. You know, we had a president once that said, you know, the buck stops on my desk. A very distinguished president. And I think the buck stops on your desk, and we're just not getting, I don't think, the answers from you that need to be presented to this committee in a forthright manner. It's a little frustrating for all of us, and it seems like that your testimony has been way too evasive. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Gingrich. Mr. Braley for questions, please.
Thank you. I want to follow up on my friend from Oklahoma's questions about the culture of safety at BP, Mr. Hayward, because you have stated repeatedly that since you took over as CEO of BP, that safe, reliable operations are #1 priority, correct?
That is correct.
And you've been CEO for the past 3 years, correct?
Correct.
Then explain to us why, between June of 2007 and February of 2010, the Occupational Health and Safety Administration checked 55 oil refineries operating in the U.S. 2 of those 55 are owned by BP, and BP's refineries racked up 760 citations for egregiously willful safety violations, accounting for 97% of the worst and most serious violations that OSHA monitors in the workplace. That doesn't sound like a culture of safety.
We acknowledge we had very serious issues in 2005 and 2006.
Well, I'm not talking about 2005 and 2006. I'm citing from an OSHA study between June of 2007 on your watch and February of 2010, where OSHA said BP has a systemic safety problem. And of those 760 that were classified as egregious and willful, it's important to note that that is the worst violation that OSHA can identify. And their definition is a violation committed with plain indifference to, or intentional disregard for employee safety and health. 97% of all of those egregious violations at U.S. refineries on your watch were against your company. That doesn't sound like a company that, to use your words, is committed to safe, reliable operations as your #1 priority. There's a complete disconnect between your testimony and the reality of these OSHA findings. Do you understand that?
I understand what you're saying.
So we also had Mr. Barton earlier make this comment about what happened at the White House yesterday. Were you there for that conference with the White House?
I was.
Do you think that BP was shaken down by the Obama administration to come up with this $20 billion compensation fund?
We attended the White House at the invitation of the government to form a way forward and try and work together to deal with the leak, the response to the leak, and to return the Gulf Coast to its past. And that's what we're going to do.
And I realize that we speak the same language, but it's not always the same language when we speak English in the United States and English in Great Britain. So I want to make sure I'm clear on this. Here in this country, the word shaken down means somebody in a position of disadvantage is forced to do something against their will. Is that how you viewed these negotiations at the White House yesterday?
As I said, we came together to figure out a way of working together to resolve what is clearly a very, very serious situation.
And the reason you came together, sir, is because it was not only in the best interest of the United States taxpayers and the citizens of this country, it's also in the best interest of BP to try to get this problem solved so that it can move forward. Isn't that true?
It's undoubtedly true that we would like to resolve this issue, as would everyone else here and more broadly in this country.
When the ranking member referred to this compensation fund, which I applaud as a positive step forward, as a slush fund, I want you to know that in this country, that implies a very negative connotation as something illegal, below the surface of what's acceptable. Did you consider this compensation fund for people who had lost their lives, lost their businesses, lost their environment, lost their ability to earn? Did you consider that to be a slush fund?
As we said yesterday, the fund is a signal of our commitment to do right, to ensure that individuals, fishermen, charter boat captains, small hotel owners, everyone who's been impacted by this is kept whole. That is what I have said from the very beginning of this, and that is what we intend to do. And as I said in my testimony, I hope people will now see that we are good for our word.
And can we take that as a no in response to my question, sir, that you did not consider this to be a slush fund?
I certainly didn't think it was a slush fund.
Thank you.
Congressman.
I'll yield back.
Mr. Latta for questions, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Hayward. Earlier in the morning, our ranking member, Mr. Burgess, had asked a question, and you had responded, if I wrote it down here correctly, that everything that we do is subject to regulatory oversight. And who is that when we're talking about regulatory oversight?
The regulatory oversight of the deepwater drilling operations is the Mineral Management Service.
Okay, but here in the federal government, who would be out on the rig for that oversight?
It is the inspectors of the Mineral Management Service, I believe.
And when, you know, I'm sure that the records are out there, but when was the last time that the MMS would have been on the rig for inspection?
I'm afraid I'm not aware of that date, but I would imagine it was relatively shortly before the incident.
Okay, do you know of any citations that were issued during that time that they were out on the rig?
I'm not aware of any citations, no.
Let me ask this question. I know I've talked to quite a few members from the Gulf Coast and also from news reports, and there have been many, many cases out there where there's talking about that it takes almost about 5 days for a turnaround time, and once it starts, and I came from local government, And so, there's a chain of command out there from local government to state government, and depending what the chain is out there. But they're saying over and over and over, it takes about 5 days. And a lot of times it says we have to go talk to BP. And I was just wondering, because knowing that time is of the essence out there because of all these different critical matters that are happening, why is this that they say they have to go ask BP and this turnaround time takes so long?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Could you get that information for us?
We can, yes, certainly.
Well, I guess the next question probably might be going to have the same response, but the question then is who set the procedure up this way that we'd have a situation where it would take a 5-day turnaround time? Do you have any knowledge of that?
I'm afraid I don't know.
After the disaster occurred, have you had a direct contact with the White House, and do you have a direct person at the White House that you have been dealing with that when problems arise that you can get things turned around quickly?
My primary contact through all of this has been with Admiral Thad Allen, who is the National Incident Commander, and he and I talk on a very regular basis.
When you say on a very regular basis, how often would that be?
Typically once a day, often more than once a day.
Well, and again, as the lady from Tennessee, we have a kind of a frustration level on getting some responses. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Latta. Ms. DeGette for 8 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, in your initial testimony, you testified that BP has drilled hundreds of wells around the world. How many of them are deepwater wells?
I don't know the precise number, but we drill a lot of deep water wells in various parts of the world.
Okay, you don't know how many. Do you think that BP's wells, irrespective of where they are drilled, should be drilled to the highest industry standards?
I believe that's what we try and do.
So your answer would be yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And as this well was being drilled, were you informed as CEO of the company of the progress of the well?
I was not.
You were not. Okay. Now, before I continue, I know you've had difficulty answering some of the technical questions members have asked you, so I know you brought a technical expert with you, Mr. Zangi. Would you like us to swear him in so he can help you answer some of my technical questions?
I think that depends on the question.
All right, well, let's see how it goes. Now, Mr. Hayward, you said that you received the chairman's June 14th letter to you, which talks about 5 decisions that compromise the safety of this well: well design, centralizer, cement bond log, mud circulation, and lockdown sleeve. I want to ask you in my questioning about one of those issues, and that's the cement bond log. First thing I want you to do, if you can take that notebook that's to your left, open it up. In the front flap, there is a memo which was written from Brian Morrell to Richard Miller on Wednesday, April 14th. And that memo says, "This has been a nightmare well, which has everyone all over the place." Did anybody inform you, as CEO of the company, in April of this year that this was a nightmare well?
They did not.
Okay. Did you subsequently see this memo? Have you seen this memo?
I saw this memo when it was raised by your committee.
And that's the first you ever heard of it?
That is the first time
Is that the first you ever heard of it being a nightmare well?
When I first saw this
As CEO.
memo.
Okay. Now, let's talk for a minute about the cementing job, because all of the testimony that we've had in this committee through our hearings, also in the Natural Resources Committee through their hearings, indicates that the choices that BP made and its subcontractors in order to save money led to blind faith in a successful cementing job. Let me just walk through it so that you can understand. First of all, BP chose a riskier well design, and the Chairman Waxman, talked about this for a moment. The best practice would have been to use a liner and a tieback, which provides 4 barriers to prevent the flow of dangerous hydrocarbons to the wellhead. Instead, BP, as the chairman said, chose a long string approach which has only 2 barriers. An internal document of the company warned that this approach was not recommended because, quote, cementing simulations indicate it's unlikely to be a successful cement job. And you can look at tab 6 of the notebook that you have in front of you to see that, Mr. Hayward. It says, cement simulations indicate it is unlikely to be a successful cement job due to formulation breakdown. This is an internal BP confidential document from mid-April. Have you seen this document before?
I saw it as a consequence of the letter that I received.
But you did not see it at the time.
I did not see it
But there
at
were
the time.
BP folks who saw it, correct? To your knowledge.
There were certainly BP people who saw this.
Okay. Secondly, so the document says there would be a potential need to verify with a bond log and perform a remedial cement job, but BP chose the riskier approach. Secondly, BP chose the riskier centralizer option. Experts have told us in testimony to this committee that the best practice would have been to use 21 centralizers, but BP only used 6. If you take a look at tab 8, it says, on page 18, it says, you did this even though your cementer, Halliburton, said this would create a, quote, severe risk that the cement job would fail. It says based on it says that it would be a severe risk. And BP's operations drilling engineer wrote about this decision. Who cares? It's done. End of story. We'll probably be fine and get a good cement job. Were you aware of that document at the time, Mr. Hayward?
I was not aware of any of these documents.
And when
at
did
the
you
time.
learn about that memo?
That memo was again when I was made aware of it by your committee.
But you wouldn't deny that BP employees and supervisors were aware of that document at the time, correct?
There were people in BP who were aware of
Now,
that document.
would you say that it's the best business practices to say, who cares, it's done, end of story, we'll probably be fine and we'll get a good cement job?
I think that email is a cause for concern.
I
I'd
would
like
think
to
so.
understand the
Thank you.
context in which it was sent, and as I've said a number of times, if there is any evidence that people put costs ahead of safety,
Okay.
then I will take action.
I understand. Let me finish with the cement bond. BP failed to perform the most effective test that was known to determine whether the cement was properly sealed, and that's the cement bond log test. There was a contractor, Schlumberger, on board hired to perform this test, but they were sent away 11 hours prior to the explosion. This test was described by Halliburton's chief safety officer, Tim Probert, as, quote, the only test that can really determine the actual effectiveness of the bond between the cement sheets, the formation and the casing itself. Now, the committee has consulted an independent expert who said that cement bond logs should always be used. Another expert said it is unheard of not to perform this test. He called your decision, and I'm quoting, horribly negligent. So I want to ask you a question. Do you think, as CEO of this company, it was a mistake not to conduct the cement bond log test?
That is what our investigation will determine.
So your answer would be yes, it was a mistake, correct?
I'm not able to answer yes or no until the investigation is complete. When we've
Because your
completed-
lawyers told you not to, or what?
No, simply because I wasn't involved. I'm sorry.
Okay, but you just said you think that all the evidence shows it was a mistake, correct?
That is not correct. That's not what
Okay.
I said.
Do you think it was all right not to conduct
I think we need to complete the investigation.
Okay.
And
Well-
determine whether running a cement bond log or not would have created a major difference to what happened here.
Okay.
There are
Let me ask you this. Are you aware of the fact it would have cost about $128,000 and taken 9 to 12 hours to complete the cement bond log test?
I am aware of that fact, yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, in your testimony, you said that some of the best minds and the deepest expertise are being brought to bear on the oil spill, and that it's difficult to imagine the gathering of a larger, more technically proficient team in one place in peacetime. Now, I know that's meant to reassure us that everything possible is being done, but it does make me wonder who was making these key decisions before the accident. Now, one of these key decisions was which type of pipe to insert in the well, a single tube from the top or a two-piece liner with a tieback setup. Now, the second design offers more barriers to unintended gas flow, and on Tuesday, the other oil companies that we talked to told us they would have chosen that design. Looking back, the decision that BP made appears to have had serious consequences. Mr. Hayward, were you involved in that decision?
I was not involved in that decision.
Were you aware of that decision?
I was not involved or aware of any of the decisions around this well as it was being drilled.
We asked your representatives, who are the senior BP executives responsible for the Macondo well. They told us it was Andy Inglis, the chief executive for exploration, and Doug Suttles, the chief operating officer for exploration. Can you tell me, was Andy Inglis involved in this decision?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I genuinely don't know. I would be very surprised.
What about Doug Suttles? Was he involved in the decision?
I would also be very surprised if Mr. Suttles was involved in any decision.
So we've reviewed all of their emails and communications. We find no record that they knew anything about this decision. In fact, we find no evidence that they ever received briefings on the activities aboard the Deepwater Horizon before the explosion. These decisions all seem to have been delegated to much lower-ranking officials. Well, Mr. Hayward, then, who was the one who made the decision to use a single tube of metal from the top of the well to the bottom? Who did make that decision?
I'm not sure exactly who made the decision. It would have been a decision taken by the drilling organization in the Gulf of Mexico. So they are the technical experts that have the technical knowledge and understanding to make decisions of that
But you
sort.
can't tell this committee who that person was?
I can't sitting here today, I'm afraid.
You can get this information to our committee? I mean, I think it's pretty amazing that this is a decision that had enormous consequences, and you can't even tell the committee who made the decision on behalf of your company. And the reason I'm asking you these questions is because your industry is different than many. You're not the CEO of a department store chain where it's fine to leave decisions about running the store to branch managers. You know, if a department store middle manager makes a mistake, there's no life or death consequences. What you do is different. You're drilling far below sea level into a region that's more like outer space than anything else. The consequences of that drilling are huge. If a mistake or misjudgment is made, workers on the rig can get killed and an environmental catastrophe can be unleashed. The best minds in the senior leadership of a company should be paying close attention to those risks. But it didn't happen here. And now we're all paying the consequences because those of you at the top don't seem to have a clue about what was going on this rig. I'm sitting here thinking I could be a CEO of an oil company. I hear it pays a little bit better than being a member of Congress because I've watched you in front of this committee, and you're not able to give us much information on anything here. I want to ask you one last question while I have some time. You told us that you're doing everything possible to stop this well from leaking, but it seems to me that what we're left with now is waiting for this relief well to be drilled, and that's going to happen sometime in August. So, you know, today is June 17th. Now, back in 1979, the ITOX-1 took over 9 months to cap after drilling several relief wells. And that well was only 160 feet down into the ocean, while the Macondo well was over 5,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. Can you tell us today, have you abandoned any other efforts to kill this well? Or are we at the point now where BP is doing nothing until the relief well gets down there? Or are you trying some different technology or some other way to kill the well, you know, before you get a relief well down there? Is there anything else on the horizon?
I'm afraid there are no other options to kill this well other than from a well at the base of the reservoir. As you are all aware, we tried to kill the well from the top using a top kill operation, and the pressures in the well are such that it's not possible to do that. So we have to rely on the relief wells. In the interim, we are continuing to contain as much of the oil as we can, and that operation is currently containing 20,000 barrels a day. by the end of this month, we'll have the ability to contain between 40 and 50,000 barrels a day, and by the middle of July, between 60 and 80,000 barrels a day.
I'll ask you the same question I asked other oil executives on Tuesday. Why wouldn't you just drill relief wells when you drill the main well, so that if something like this happened, instead of us waiting 2-3 months and watching millions of barrels of oil come into the ocean, destroying our ecosystem and our way of life in the Gulf Coast, that you could kill that well in a short period of time? I understand the extra relief well would cost you a little bit more money, but it seems to me in this case it would save you billions of dollars. What are your thoughts on drilling relief wells along with main wells?
I think we will need to look at all of the options available to us going forwards with respect to deep water exploration.
I see my time's up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Ms. Schakowsky for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to focus on the mindset of BP when it comes to its workers. You said in your opening statement that you were personally devastated. You attended a memorial service for those men. It was a shattering moment. I want to offer my sincere condolences to their friends and families. I can only imagine their sorrow. Probably not as devastated as the widows that testified before our committee. And I asked them, what about BP? What kind of contact have you had with BP since the incident? Letters, phone calls, visits. And Natalie Rochdo said 2 BP men attended Shane's services, and they never extended a hand, a hug, never extended a "we're sorry," their condolences. The only words that came out of their mouth was where they were to be seated, and I never saw them after that. I asked, what about you, Mrs. Kemp? 2 BP men came to Wyatt's services, and one extended his hand. I shook it. He told me he was very sorry for my loss. He asked if he could hug me. He did. The other gentleman extended his hand, told me who he was. And they sent 2 plants to the service. And that is the extent of my conversation or any dealings with BP. That's it. Do you feel that you owe something more to those women and to just in terms of expressing something and more?
As I said, I'm devastated by the accident, absolutely devastated. And I feel great sorrow for the people who have been impacted by it.
Well, they haven't heard anything.
The people who were killed in the accident were not BP employees. They're employees of Transocean, another contractor, and both of them made it very clear that they wanted to deal with the families. We have provided support to both Transocean and MI Swallow.
I guess I was talking to you as a human being.
And we have made it clear that we will provide all and every need for the families. But
okay, let me ask another question. There were BP personnel on the rig, and we read that oil workers from the rig were held in seclusion on the open water for up to 2 days after the April 20 explosion, while attorneys attempted to convince them to sign legal documents stating that they were unharmed by the incident. The men claimed that they were forbidden from having any contact with concerned loved ones during that time and were told that they would not be able to go home until they signed the documents they were presented with. After being awake for 50 harrowing hours, Stephen Davis caved in and signed the papers. He said most of the others did as well. Do you think this is an appropriate way to treat people that experience that? And since you're executives, you had people on the rig, what was their feeling about that? What is your feeling about that?
I think it's inappropriate, and it was nothing to do with BP.
I see, and BP had no comment on it and had no opportunity. I mean, did the company know about it? Was there any?
I don't believe we were aware it was taking place, but it was certainly nothing to do with BP.
Okay, well, I did mention during my opening statement this document that basically says such voluntary effort shall be at my own risk, that people were made to sign. And there were 2 court appearances that were needed to finally get BP to take responsibility, but what I understand is that BP continued to fail to provide adequate protective gear to the fishermen. And on May 16th, OSHA issued a detailed directive on the training requirement for specific task responders and stated that OSHA had officials monitoring the training and observing the cleanup. But according to testimony we heard in Louisiana, still BP failed to provide respirators to the workers exposed to the crude oil, and the workers experienced health impacts. The workers were afraid to speak up due to the potential to lose their jobs. Those fishermen who attempted to wear respirators while working were threatened to be fired by BP due to the workers using the respirators. Do you know anything about that?
I'm not aware of that. What we clearly are endeavouring to do is to ensure that anyone involved in the response is appropriately provided with whatever safety equipment is required.
Endeavoring to provide, are the workers currently provided with what they need?
Absolutely. In every case, we are trying to make certain that people do not
Again,
put
you're
them...
trying to make certain, but is all the equipment there, and are all these workers protected?
To my knowledge, yes.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Next turn to Mr. Ross for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Hayward, since my opening statement, up to 416,666 gallons of oil have leaked into the Gulf. That was about 4 hours ago. In my opening statement 4 hours ago, I asked you to provide us, to be open with us and honest with us in your responses, and instead it seems as though we're getting statements memorized by you and provided by your legal counsel. I don't know if BP quite understands how angry the American people and the world is at them. I can tell you it's rare that you see Democrats and Republicans on this panel agreeing with one another, and yet it's been pretty consistent today with a few major exceptions. The level of discontent and anger and frustration at BP. I also watch this on the news, and it seems to me that BP has not been honest with the American people. It's not been honest with our government, and it seems as though you're trying to hide something. Sir, it's hard to hide 2.5 million gallons of oil a day pouring into the Gulf. We want answers. We want you to be honest and open with us, and we want to finally see the kind of transparency that you've been talking about. I've got a few questions for you. BP is currently in the process of drilling 2 relief wells to stop the flow of oil that may or may not work, which you've said will be finished by August. After these relief wells are finished and the leak has been stopped, what does BP plan to do with these wells? Do you plan to put these wells into production and make a profit off of them? Or do you plan to shut them down after the situation has been resolved?
They will be shut down after the situation has been resolved. The first relief well, we will pump mud down the relief well to kill the well, kill the current well that is flowing, and then cement.
Cleanup effort thus far has created over 250 tons of solid waste and 175,000 gallons of liquid waste that are now being carted away from the Gulf Coast and shipped off to landfills. BP executives have stated that this waste, which is admittedly hazardous and destructive to our ocean environment, is perfectly safe to dump in our nation's landfills. You've polluted our coast and our air with this tragic spill, and now you are shipping the waste you collect and dumping it near our homes and our water sources. I want to know where this waste is going, and are you shipping it throughout the country? How can we be sure it has been treated and is safe?
I don't know the details of that, but I can assure you that we will do the right thing to ensure that it is treated in the proper and appropriate way.
Can you provide me and this committee with a response?
We certainly can.
Let me try this in the time I have left. This has been asked several times, and I don't think we've gotten an answer yet. We all know about the emails from BP employees expressing their concerns about the casing procedures, including an April 15th email from your drilling engineer, Brian Morrell, who described the well as, quote, a nightmare well. How much were the drilling engineers consulted in the decision to use the single-string casing? Was this a bottom-up decision in which the people actually connected to drilling the operation had some influence, or did it come from the top down?
As I understand it, from the discussion with our investigation team and from the review of the documents, there was a discussion taking place amongst the drilling engineering team responsible for this well, and that's how the decision and the judgments were taken.
So would you call that a bottom-up decision or a top-down decision?
I would say it was a decision taken by the right experts with the right technical knowledge to make the decision.
In your testimony, you note that you are currently drilling 2 relief wells which will ultimately stem the flow of oil. In previous testimony from BP and Transocean, we have heard that there are numerous redundancies built into all of your equipment and in all of your personnel procedures to ensure that your company does the very best it can to ensure that tragedies like the one we've seen unfold over the past 59 days don't occur. My question is this: do you view these relief wells as an on-off switch? When these wells are complete, are they going to stop the flow of oil into our ocean? If so, why didn't you pre-drill emergency relief wells prior to this whole mess? It's been asked before. We're still waiting for a good answer. Did you do cost-benefit analysis and determine that it was cheaper to drill 1 well, spend years rolling in profits from the oil you managed to capture, and then potentially pay a massive sum to clean up an inevitable tragedy? Which was it, sir?
We believed that the blowout preventer was the ultimate fail-safe mechanism. That clearly was not the case in this instance. It failed in 3 separate occasions. It failed when it was activated on the drilling rig at the time of the incident. It failed to operate when the drilling rig separated from the blowout preventer, as it should have done, and it failed to activate when we had submersible robots at the blowout preventer within 24 hours of the incident. That was the fail-safe mechanism.
Mr. Chairman, I see I'm out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Ms. Christensen for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, you've pledged $20 billion to a trust fund, which I see as a commitment to meet BP's obligation and not a slush fund, just for the record. My question is, are health payments, such as for any illnesses that residents or workers may develop as a result of the spill, covered in your statement to cover all legitimate claims? And what about federal and local government outlays of health and other personnel? Are they covered under that?
Claims of that sort are covered under the fund.
Thank you. Several individuals and organizations have called for more people and more expertise to assist in fighting what is increasingly being called a war. General Honore calls it World War III and calls for it to be fought as such. What is not a part of the effort that needs to be? What's missing? And do you feel that you need more hands, more people to effectively fight this so-called war and keep the oil and prevent the oil from creating any more damage?
Well, we've been fighting a battle on 3 fronts since the very beginning: to eliminate the leak, to contain the oil on the surface, and to defend the shore. And it is now the task of the incident commander, the National Incident Commander, Thad Allen, to determine what further resources are required. It's a conversation that he and I have on a regular basis to try and ensure that we have the right resources in the right place at the right time to deal with the incident.
So as of your last conversation with Admiral Allen, the sense was that you had all that you needed and all of the people that you needed?
We're continuing, we're continuing to work the issue of defending the shore, to try and mitigate to the maximum extent possible the amount of oil that comes on shore. That is where we can still do more to defend the beaches.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. You state also in your testimony that the events of 420 were not foreseen by you, but in light of the several areas of concern that have been raised, shouldn't someone have foreseen and be able to prevent the explosion? For example, I understand that there's supposed to be a policy where any one person on a rig can shut it down if they perceive a problem. Is this a real policy or that's enforced and reinforced in training, or is it something just on paper? Because that didn't seem to happen in this instance, even though some Transocean, some Halliburton, and even BP employees reportedly had serious concerns.
It is a policy that is real. And if anyone at any time believes that what they're doing is unsafe, they have both the right and the obligation to stop the task.
Are you surprised that no one, given what we're hearing, and I know the investigation is not complete, that no one made that decision to shut the rig down?
I think in the light of what we now know, it is, of course, surprising that someone didn't say that they were concerned. And I think that is to the heart of the investigation, to understand exactly what the events were and why there was not different decisions taken with respect to the events, particularly in the last 5 or 6 hours on the day of the incident.
There was a company, I think it's, that was supposed to do the Schlumberger that was on the rig at the time and left. Now, when we were in New Orleans, we were told in the hearing that they left because of concern for safety. But other reports said that they left because they were told they weren't needed. What is, in your, to your knowledge, is the correct
reason? I believe
reason?
that it's clear that they left the rig because they had completed the task, or the task that they had anticipated to do was not required.
Okay, so as far as you know, it was not that they felt unsafe, as we were told in New Orleans.
It was nothing to do, I don't believe, on the basis of anything that I have seen, that it was anything to do with safety.
Okay. My last question. In your testimony, you say, and I'm quoting, BP is a responsible party under the Oil Pollution Act, and you distinguish that terminology from any implication of legal liability, which is still being investigated. But you say A. Do you think that you're the sole responsible party, or might there be others, and if so, who?
The government has named 4 responsible parties. They are BP, Transocean, Mitsui, and Anadarko. They have all been named as responsible parties in this incident.
The last 2 were?
Mitsui, Anadarko, Transocean, and BP.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Next for questions would be Mr. Welch. He's not here. Next would be Mr. Green for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, yesterday, Mr. Tillerson or day before yesterday, ExxonMobil testified Tuesday that in the aftermath of the Exxon Valdez accident, ExxonMobil launched a full-scale, top-to-bottom review of their operations and implementing far-reaching actions that today guide every operating decision they make on a daily basis. Have there been any specific reforms that BP's implemented following the Alaska pipeline accident and the Texas City refinery disaster?
We've implemented major change following the incidents in 2006 and 2007. We've implemented changes to our people in terms of the skills and capabilities we have. We've implemented changes to the training that they get and the expertise that they develop, and we've implemented significant changes to all of our operating practices, including the implementation of an operating management system that covers all of the company's operations. It has been a root and branch review from top to bottom.
I guess my concern is, having followed both the Alaskan pipeline and the Texas City refinery disaster, those reforms haven't worked. What will be done differently this time in the last almost 60 days? Has there been some discussion on why the reforms from the Texas City and the pipeline, Alaska pipeline, hasn't worked? And again, you know the information our committee has. You received a letter 2 days ago on some of the decisions that were made literally on the rig by BP's representatives. what, going forward from here, will we know 5 years from now that we won't have to repeat what we're doing this time?
That is why I am so determined to get to the bottom of this incident, such that we can learn from it and make changes to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
What's happened with your drilling procedures internationally? I know there are different standards for different companies. Our committee heard testimony that from the executive a few days ago that typically the Norway and the Scandinavian countries have the toughest offshore drilling. I know BP is active in Norway. Is there a significant difference on what you do in the Gulf of Mexico as compared to what you do off the coast of Norway, or even off the coast of Edinburgh or off the coast of Great Britain?
We operate to the same standards globally, and the truth is that the rules and regulations, as I understand it, in the Gulf of Mexico are higher than they are, for example, in the North Sea on the UK sector, in terms of the requirements. So we will continue to learn from this incident and make changes to ensure that it cannot happen again, and it will be global.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Green, you yield back?
Yes.
Mr. Green yields back. Next we have to turn to Mr. Barton, ranking member, for questions, please.
Thank you, Chairman Stupak. I appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions. Mr. Hayworth, yesterday when we had a hearing in a different subcommittee of this full committee, we had 4 CEOs of other oil companies. I think to a person, and I could be wrong about this, but I think they all indicated that they either would not have drilled this well or at least would not have drilled it the way BP drilled it. What's your response to that?
I want to understand exactly what happened through our investigation, to compare it with other practices to determine what is the truth. And I can't comment today on that.
All right. I have had off-camera discussions with a number of experts in the drilling processes for the deep Gulf of Mexico, and they all say that BP has a different culture, that there is, for example, in most of the other companies that operate in the deep Gulf, there are a number of individuals on site that have what is called stop order authority. In other words, if they see something that's going on that compromises safety or integrity, they have the ability to stop production. But I'm told that BP doesn't give that authority, that it is further up the chain of command. Is that correct? And if so, is that something that BP may consider changing given what's happened?
On a drilling operation such as this, anyone can stop it. The BP man, the Transocean driller, the Transocean tool pusher, the OIM, or the BP well site leader. It requires everyone to agree to continue. And if there is one person who does not agree, then they do not continue.
So when I'm told that the BP culture in terms of this authority is different, I've been told incorrectly.
I believe that's so, Congressman.
Okay. In terms of the 2 relief wells that are currently being drilled, are they being drilled using the same procedures as this well, or are they being drilled differently? In other words, some of the things that weren't used on this well, the double casing, things of this sort, are those relief wells going to use these enhanced safety procedures?
There are clearly some areas of concern, as we've identified in our investigation, cement casing, and the relief wells are being drilled with all of those issues absolutely foremost in the procedure. Now, clearly the relief wells are rather different because of what they have to do. But all of the things that we have learnt to date from our investigation have absolutely been incorporated into the activity that is taking place with respect to the relief wells.
Have you either read or been at least given a summary of the letter that Chairman Waxman and Chairman Stupak sent earlier in the week that lists the 5 or 6 outstanding, or what they consider, what the staffs consider to be the anomalies in this well and the safety concerns. Are you familiar with that letter?
I am familiar with that letter.
Okay. Do you agree in general with the concerns that are raised there about the lack of a, for lack of a better term, a safety collar being employed, the number of devices that could have stopped the oil and gas venting and escaping up the well? There was somebody recommended, I think, 21 or 22, and BP made a decision to only use 6. Do you, now that you know what's happened, do you share some of the concerns that letter raises?
I think I share the concern about the number of contributory factors that have created this incident. They're focused on the cement, on the casing, on the integrity test, on the well control procedures, and on the complete failure of the blowout preventer. And they are all areas that I believe we all need to understand fully before we draw conclusions about how this accident occurred.
And my final question is that, based on what you now know, do you agree with the general conclusion expressed yesterday that this was a preventable accident?
I believe that all accidents are preventable. Absolutely.
Okay. Finally, Mr. Chairman, if I may take a small point of personal privilege, I want the record to be absolutely clear that I think BP is responsible for this accident, should be held responsible, and should in every way do everything possible to make good on the consequences that have resulted from this accident. And if anything I've said this morning has been misconstrued in an opposite effect, I want to apologize for that misconstruction. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. Ms. Sutton for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, this testimony has been fascinating. We've heard a lot about your desire to come in and improve the safety of operations everywhere in the world, something to that effect. And you listed another top priority: to conduct BP's business in a way that is in tune with the world without damaging the environment. Would you agree that BP did not meet those goals on the Deepwater Horizon rig?
I think it's clear that I regret, BP regrets what has happened here deeply.
So obviously BP did not meet those goals on the Deepwater Horizon rig. But Mr. Hayward, the concern beyond that is there seems to be little evidence about how hard BP tried to meet that goal. The committee's investigation of the Deepwater Horizon disaster identified 5 key decisions. We've talked about it over and over again in this hearing, made by BP officials in the days before the explosion. Those decisions had 2 common denominators. They saved time and cut costs, and they each increased risks. Now, I've heard you say over and over again in the course of today's hearings that there is nothing that I have seen in evidence so far that BP put costs ahead of safety. And I have to tell you how detached that seems, because we've also talked about some of the documents that the committee has unearthed, and document after document that indicated that BP officials in charge of the Deepwater Horizon were focused on saving time and money. For example, the document that says that the well design was chosen because it would save $7 to $10 million. You're familiar with that document, correct?
I'm familiar with that document.
Okay. And another one says that the reason for not using sufficient centralizers is because it would take 10 hours to install them. You're familiar with that document?
Yes, I'm familiar with that document.
Okay. And you indicated that you weren't familiar with any of this happening before the explosion. You only learned about it afterwards, right? As the CEO of this company.
I wasn't familiar with any of the decisions or any of the documents surrounding this well prior or during the drilling of the well.
Okay, and what's fascinating also is that when you were asked about how these decisions are made within the structure of your organization, you referenced this from a perspective of, as I understand it from our investigation, this is how these decisions are made. But you're the leader of the company. So you couldn't even tell us if they were top-down or bottom-up decisions. You were just referencing them based on an after-the-fact investigation. So when we talk about these documents, the documents I just referenced, the one that says the well design was chosen because it would save $7 to $10 million, and the other one that says that the reason for not using sufficient centralizers is because it would take 10 hours to install them. None of these documents makes a decision to ensure a safe environment on the rig or protect the environment from a catastrophic oil spill. Would you say that that's true, that that doesn't indicate a decision being made based on ensuring a safe environment or protecting the environment?
I don't think it's possible to say that based on the documents out of context.
And see, that's why I think there's a real detachment here, a real disconnect, as we've heard that word used earlier today. It seems to me there was a disconnect prior to the explosion, and there remains a disconnect when viewing evidence that is very clear and being presented. This was a tragic failure. You've talked about your commitment to safety and the environment, but when push came to shove on the Deepwater horizon, the company's concern seemed to be the bottom line. And I guess this is my question to you, Mr. Hayward. Who was responsible for the failures on the Deepwater horizon and the terrible set of decisions that led to the tragedy in the Gulf?
That is what our investigation will determine, and that is what it's going to do. And if there is at any point evidence to suggest that people put costs ahead of safety, then I will take action.
So evidence like those documents?
The evidence from the totality of the investigation.
Okay, Mr. Hayward, as the leader of the company, don't you have to accept the responsibility? You talked about the importance of safety and the environment, but you presided over a corporate culture where safety and risks to the environment were ignored in order to save a few days and a few dollars in drilling costs. If you're the leader of the company, don't you have to take responsibility?
I'm absolutely responsible for the safety and reliable operations in BP. That is what I have said all along.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Sutton. Mr. Welch, for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, is it true that in 2005, the Texas City operation owned by BP blew up, resulting in the loss of lives of 15 workers?
That is true.
And is it true that in 2006, a BP oil pipeline in Alaska ruptured and spilled 200,000 gallons of crude oil?
That is true.
And is it true that in 2007, when you took over as CEO of BP, the corporation settled a series of criminal, not civil, criminal charges and agreed to pay $370 million in fines?
That is correct.
And is it also true that in 1 year, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, found more than 700 violations at BP's Texas City refinery and fined BP what was then a record fine of $87.4 million? Is that true?
That's correct.
And is it true that earlier this year, a BP refinery in Toledo, Ohio, was fined $3 million for willful, and I emphasize the term and the finding, willful safety violations, including the use of valves similar to those that contributed to the Texas City blast?
That is correct.
And is it true as well that the U.S. Chemical Safety Board, which did investigation into the Texas City refinery, was headed with the active participation of former Secretary of State James Baker? You familiar with that report?
I'm very familiar with that report.
And in that report, which you, I take it, regard as credible?
I believe it's very credible, and it's the basis on which we moved forward in 2007.
And that report, and I quote, found that BP management allowed operators and supervisors to alter, to edit, to add, and to remove procedural steps at the Texas City refinery without assessing risk. And the Baker panel examined all of BP's U.S. refineries and found a toleration of serious deviations from safe operating practices. Is that an accurate statement of the findings of Mr. Baker's report?
It is an accurate findings, and based on the findings of that report and the instances of 2005 and 2006,
and in the case
we implemented a systematic change in how we manage safety and a systematic change in the culture of BP.
Well, let me
that
ask
is
you,
something we have done consistently over the last 3 years.
well, did that systematic change that you say you implemented as a result of the Baker report account for the reason that at Deepwater Horizon, when faced with the choice of a cheaper and quicker casing design or a safer design, BP chose the cheaper and quicker casing design? Did you do that on the basis of the recommendations of the Baker report?
As I've said, we need to wait for the results of the investigation to conclude. If there is any evidence whatsoever that people put costs ahead of safety in this incident, then
well, I'm not going to ask you
action.
what their reason was, but I'm going to ask you, in fact, it's not in dispute that the choice was made to use a cheaper and quicker casing design rather than a more expensive design. And I'll ask you again, there were fewer casing centralizers than some folks were recommending. Is that, I'll leave out motivation, but there was a choice of more casing centralizers or fewer casing centralizers. More cost more, fewer cost less. Which choice did BP make at Deepwater Horizon?
The decision taken by the engineering team at the time, which was a technical judgment, was to use fewer centralizers rather than more. It is not always true that more is better.
And BP chose at Deepwater Horizon not to circulate drilling mud that would have cleaned out the well. It chose a lighter saltwater base for the cementing procedure. Is that correct?
The procedure to displace the mud was a procedure that is not uncommon in the industry. It was a procedure that was approved by the MMS prior to implementing it.
Are you saying you made the right choice in this case?
I'm not able to make a judgment as to whether the right choices were made.
Well, you're the CEO.
But I'm not, with respect, Congressman, a drilling engineer or a technically qualified engineer in these matters.
But you're in charge of them.
That doesn't mean to say I'm an expert.
Well, I mean, you know, one of the frustrations that I think folks have is who is in charge. And there was a Baker report that said that there was a systematic choice being made consistently by BP that led to the loss of life, that led to pollution, that could be attributed to a decision based on saving money, increasing profits at the expense of safety, and as it turns out, unfortunately, human lives. You know, I'm going to get back to what I asked you earlier. I think all of us live in a world where we'd prefer to have fewer regulations rather than more. We'd like to rely on trust and faith in our word rather than regulations and checking over your shoulder and all those things that I think both sides find annoying. But I'm going to ask you the question, does a CEO who has presided over a company that's incurred $370 million in fines, whose company was subject to this report by Mr. Baker, indicating a choice a choice at the expense of safety, does that person who's presided over almost $100 billion in loss of shareholder value in the suspension of a $10 billion annual dividend, who's lost the confidence of shareholders and regulators, and most importantly, the families and citizens of the Gulf, does that person enjoy the confidence necessary to continue acting as CEO, or is it time for that CEO to resign?
I'm focused on the response. I'm focused on trying to eliminate the leak, trying to contain the oil on the surface and defend the beaches, and to clean up the spill and to restore the lives of the people on the Gulf Coast.
Yeah,
And that's what I intend to do.
Yeah, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
That concludes questions by members of the subcommittee. As I indicated earlier, members of the full committee will have an opportunity to ask questions if they so choose. So we will alternate, and as I indicated earlier, it'd be based upon committee seniority. So Mr. Stearns, you would be next first on the Republican side. Questions for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Stupak, and thank you for allowing me to ask these questions. Mr. Hayward, I've watched this hearing, and time again, you've indicated this, you've responded with this statement: I can't give you a legitimate answer to that question. You said it over and over again. They've asked you for details you didn't know. Did you bring anybody with you who has the detailed information that could help you answer a lot of these questions? Is there anybody else that you brought with?
I have a technical expert with me.
Because I don't see you go back to that technical expert, and you just continue to say, I just can't answer that question. So my question for you today, is today Thursday? Yes or no?
It is Thursday.
Okay. Next question. The people of Florida, when I talk to them and they say there's oil spilling on the coast, would it be appropriate to say that's because of BP's reckless behavior? Yes or no?
It is a consequence of a big accident.
No, yes or no? Reckless behavior or not?
There is no evidence of reckless behavior.
So you're saying here today that BP had no reckless behavior. That's your position. Yes?
There is no evidence of reckless behavior.
No. Yes or no? You're saying BP has had no reckless behavior is what you're saying to us.
I have seen no evidence of reckless behavior.
Okay, so you're on record saying there's been no reckless behavior. We had a hearing. Mr. McKay was here. We had the CEO of Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and Shell. We asked him questions. Knowing what we know today about the inconsistent well pressure test readings, would you have proceeded with withdrawing the drilling fluid from the well? Every one of them said no. Then the next question was asked to them about safety measures. Are there safety measures that your company could have taken to prevent this incident? Every one of them said yes. So you're here this morning saying your company had no reckless behavior, yet all your peers, the CEO of Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and Shell, all pointed out your reckless behavior. Later on, Halliburton warned your company that the well could have a severe gas flow problem. Were you aware of Halliburton's warning? Yes or no?
I was not involved in any of the decision-making
I don't want to hear that
around this time.
I mean, this is the same thing you've been saying all day. What I want to know is, you, in your position, has anyone on your staff briefed you about Halliburton warning your company we could have a severe gas flow problem? Were you ever notified or briefed on this? Yes or no?
No, prior to the incident.
So you're up at this top of echelon, and you didn't hear, did you hear about the emails that occurred? Later that day, a BP official involved in the decision who recognized the risks of proceeding with insufficient centralizers threw caution to the wind in an email just 4 days before the disaster, stating, who cares? It's done. End of story. We'll probably be fine. Did you know about that email?
I had no prior knowledge of this well prior to the incident
Well, what
whatsoever.
do you think? In light of what your 4 peers have said, dealing with safety, dealing with the precautions with the pressure test reading, and dealing with Halliburton, don't you think there's reckless behavior indication? Based upon if what I told you is true, do you think BP has reckless behavior?
I believe all accidents are preventable. The investigation will determine how this accident has occurred and
Okay, so
ensure that
you're
it's not
saying
repeated.
right now, based upon all the information I gave you, you do not think BP had any reckless behavior. That's your position this afternoon. Is that correct? Yes or no?
I have seen
I want you to say that you don't think BP has reckless behavior.
I have seen no evidence of reckless behavior.
Okay, all right. Now, let's say you were on a ship and you ran into the New Orleans and you spewed all this oil and you killed 11 people. Do you think the captain of that ship should be fired? Has anyone in BP been fired because of this incident? Anybody? Yes or no?
No, so far.
No people have been fired. So your captain of the ship runs into New Orleans, spews all this oil, causes all this damage from Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Louisiana, and no one's been fired?
Our investigation is ongoing.
So let's say the investigation goes for 3 years. Does that mean you wouldn't fire anybody?
As the investigation draws conclusions, we'll take the necessary action.
Okay, so in light of all the environmental damage, the human damage, and just the information from your peers saying that you were indeed reckless, and these emails I've told you, you still are going to stonewall us this afternoon, and you're saying basically, we did nothing wrong, and we're going to wait till the evidence to prove whether we did wrong or right. Is that correct?
I believe we should await for the conclusions of the various investigations before we make decisions based on those conclusions.
Well, Mr. Chairman, he did answer that today's Thursday.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, I'm going to attempt to ask some of the questions that some of my colleagues have asked, but really haven't been answered. Now, on Tuesday, we had the leaders of ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, and ConocoPhillips. They all insisted at the hearing on Tuesday that they would not have made the mistakes that led to the well explosion. Are they lying to us, or are you lying to us by telling us that you don't know who was responsible and don't know whether or not BP did something wrong? They're all saying BP did something wrong.
I believe we need to await the results of the multiple investigations before we draw conclusions.
Well, it's 2 months.
I want to get to the bottom of this more than anyone. I want to learn the lessons, and I want to ensure that we can learn the lessons and that the industry can learn the lessons.
Well, I don't understand. It's 61 days. It's 2 months. I mean, what kind of an investigation are you going to conduct? Why in 2 months, with all this oil spilling into the Gulf, do we not have at least a preliminary investigation?
Well, we are conducting a full and comprehensive investigation. It involves a team of more than 50 people. We have shared the results of that investigation as they become available with this committee, and we will continue to do that.
Well, Mr. Hayward, perhaps your lawyers have told you to be very cautious, but it's really an insult for you to come to this committee and keep repeating the same thing, evade questions, evade answers, and just repeat again and again that you were not responsible and that we have to wait for an investigation. Why didn't you come testify to this committee after the investigation if you're not prepared to tell us anything of knowledge now?
With respect, Congressman, I wasn't party to any of the decision-making around this well in the time it was being drilled, and therefore I'm not in a position to make a judgment about whether the decisions taken were the right ones or the wrong ones.
Well, but we've all made a judgment because it's 60 days, and oil is spilling into the Gulf. So obviously, decisions were made that were wrong. Can't you just admit that? Can't you just say, I'm sorry? Can't you just admit that decisions were made that were wrong instead of sitting there and telling us you don't know and you have to await an investigation?
I am very, very sorry that this accident occurred. Very sorry. I deeply regret it. I deeply regret it for very many reasons. And I do believe that it's right to investigate it fully and draw the right conclusions.
What needs to be investigated? What needs to be investigated that has not been investigated up till now, and how long will it take you?
I can't answer how long it will take because we want to make certain it's complete. But there are clearly many investigations. Excuse me, sorry. There are many investigations ongoing. There's our investigation, there's a Marine Board investigation, and a Presidential Commission. And they will undoubtedly draw important conclusions for all of them.
But you're the CEO. Shouldn't you not set the tone for the investigation? Shouldn't you not say, I demand that within a month we're going to know what happened? I mean, you're really insulting our intelligence, with all due respect, by not giving us any answers and telling us that you have to wait for some investigation. I think the rest of the world isn't blind. We know what's happened, and we know that BP obviously didn't do what it was supposed to do. Only you don't know that.
I believe I have set the right tone. We've launched an investigation within 24 hours. We've made it open and transparent, and we're sharing with everyone the results as they come out.
Well, let me ask you this. How many other wells has BP in the Gulf?
I don't know the precise number, but it's a large number,
Give me a ballpark figure.
in the order of hundreds.
Okay. How can we be assured that the same thing won't happen with one of the other wells? How can you give us assurances that what happened with this well won't happen again to several hundred wells?
The other wells that I'm referring to have all been drilled and completed and are secure.
So you are saying that in all the other wells that BP has, something that happened to this well could never happen again in any of those other wells?
All of the other wells that I'm referring to are wells that have been completed and are secure.
So is that the same assurance that you had said that you were going to, with a laser, make safety a priority? Is this the same kind of assurance that you're giving us now?
I have, throughout my tenure, been very explicit about the priority of safety in BP. It is the first word I utter every time I talk to any group of people in BP. The fact that safe and reliable operations is our #1 priority. And we have made very significant changes to our processes, to our people, and invested very significantly into the integrity of our plant and equipment over the last 3 or 4 years.
Mr. Hayward, let me just say with all due respect, I, like everyone else here and everyone else in America, is thoroughly disgusted. I think you're stalling. I think you're insulting our intelligence, and I really resent it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Engel. Member of the full committee, Mr. Scalise, for questions, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you. Let me participate in this. Mr. Hayward, this is a picture of an oiled pelican. This is our state bird in Louisiana. I'm going to keep this on my desk as long as we're battling this as a constant reminder of what's at stake. But I want you to keep this in your mind as well, to recognize we're not just talking about the loss of life, which is tragic. We're not just talking about the oil that's still spewing out of that well. We're talking about our way of life, not just in Louisiana, but all along the Gulf Coast that's at stake. I would hope you keep this image in your mind as a constant reminder of what's at stake and what we're battling on a daily basis. Our 2 priorities right now are, #1, doing everything we can to make sure that y'all cap this well, but also to battle as strongly as we can to keep the oil out of our marsh and our ecosystem. We don't want to sit back and wait until the oil comes in and does possibly irreparable damage. We want to be proactive, but we're having problems on the ground being proactive because of the delays. I still hear, I was on Grand Isle Friday, I hear the biggest complaints from our local officials that they're spending more of their time fighting BP and the federal government than they are fighting the oil. This is unacceptable. And I know you talk about all the things that y'all are doing, but it's not enough. We need a more urgent sense of response to this disaster. And I want to ask you what you're going to do to help speed that up when our local officials tell us that when they have basic questions they need answers to, it takes at least 5 days. They first go to the Coast Guard, then they're sent to BP to get approval, and then they go around in circles and they're told they're going to get answers, and they never get those answers. This is just not an acceptable way to run this operation. And so when we hear who's in charge, I want to ask you, who is in charge on the ground?
The National Incident Commander is the person in charge of this operation.
So is the federal government telling you what to do? Are you telling the incident commander what to do? When our local officials say, we need something approved, do they need to get the incident commander and your approval? Because they're getting run around in circles right now.
Well, we're not being perfect, I acknowledge that, and we're trying very hard to do better. We are operating under the direction of the federal government.
Well, and let me give you an example. When our governor came with an idea, and this was over a month ago now, he had an idea, Governor Jindal working with the local leaders, Billy Nungesser and others, to have this sand barrier plan. They laid it out. They actually made some changes. They worked with scientists, with engineers, and then over 3 weeks went by before any approval. Now, we contacted, our entire delegation signed a letter We tried to get the president engaged in breaking this logjam. Still to this day, only 25% of that plan has been approved. Now, is that you that's not approving the other 75%? Is that the federal government that's not approving it? Who's not approving the other 75%? Because it's not approved to this day.
The approval process flows through.
Who is it? Is it you or the federal government? I mean,
the ultimate approval.
Can you tell them no?
The ultimate approval process is with the government.
So the federal government's the one that hasn't approved the other 75%.
I can't speak to the details of the other 75%. What we have done.
You don't know about it? I mean, we brought this to. I know they submitted it. Our governor submitted this to you.
We have committed.
And the incident commander.
As you know, $360 million to build a large part of the barrier island.
It's not a large part. It's 25% of the plan.
But
I mean, that may seem like a large part to you. Let me go to another question that we get asked. They don't have any kind of approval of creation of a seafood safety plan. Now, is that something that was submitted to y'all? Is that the federal government that's not approving it? Is that BP that's not approving it? Because again, our local leaders, they're getting run around in a circle. And nobody's held accountable when things don't happen. And what I'm going to present to you is that we don't have time for these games to continue to be played. We can't have 5 days go by before an answer is given to anybody because the oil's coming every day. And I'll just give you an example about the sand barrier plan. Now, you say y'all have approved a lot of it. There is no plan of protection along any part of Grand Isle. And there's an area called Barataria Bay. And I would suggest you go look it up. About a week and a half ago, there was no oil in Barataria Bay. That section was scheduled to be covered by the barrier plan that still to this day hasn't been approved. Now today, there's oil, thick oil coming into Barataria Bay. And so you're not showing the sense of urgency. And whether it's you or the federal government, we've got oil in Barataria Bay when we had a plan a month ago to keep the oil out of Barataria Bay. And so when people are hearing that everything's being done, I'm going to tell you, on the ground, it's not getting done. And I don't know what you need to do differently, but you need to go do something differently. And if it's not you that's blocking it, you need to tell somebody who's blocking it because it's being blocked. And it's not getting done on the ground, and we don't have the luxury of time. This shouldn't be happening. We put plans in place to stop this from happening, and our plans are not being approved. Now, I would love it if our plans were being rejected because they were better alternatives that were being offered by somebody that were being approved. But there are no other alternatives. All we're being told is no, without any other option being presented. And what we're saying is, if you've got a better option, present it. Otherwise, approve our plan, but we don't have time to waste. Do you understand that?
I understand your concern, your anger.
Well, and I hope you make the changes that are needed because we don't have time. This is something else. We continue to get, and my office gets flooded. I know a lot of others get flooded with ideas of how to stop the oil from coming into the marsh, how to cap the well, and other things. We've seen basic ideas like putting hay in the water all the way up to the super tankers in Saudi Arabia. None of them are getting done on the ground. I'm going to give you this database. This is a database of ideas with links, with schematics, of a number of different ideas that should be done that can stop the oil from coming into our marsh. But it's not getting done. We don't have time to waste. And so I'm going to ask you to move swiftly on this. And I'm going to give you a resolution passed by our Senate that asks that you engage our local people who have been affected by this. A lot of them aren't even being able to be employed in saving the marsh. They want that done, and also to speed up the efforts on some of these alternatives that are going nowhere. We've got a lot of ocean out there that's got oil.
Time, Mr.
We want you to use every opportunity to fix that. So I'm going to give this to you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Capps for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, your $20 billion of compensation fund is a good first step, but it's just the beginning. You're going to have to fully compensate everyone who's been affected by this disaster. This week, BP announced the first installment of a $25 million fund within a broader $500 million commitment to the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. Is BP still committed to putting the full $500 million, not just the 25 installment, but the full $500 million towards this initiative?
We are. It's an initiative that will take place, we believe, over 10 years.
When will we see the details of this entire program?
It's being worked by the experts currently. We think it's important to have a program that has firm scientific foundation.
Are these your experts, sir?
No, these are not our experts. These are independent scientists drawn across the United States from some of the...
I would request that you would submit to the committee the list of experts that you have that are developing this program. I would appreciate that.
We'd be very happy to do that.
Will there be further scientific investments that you will make available to the research community, significant further investments of dollars?
Well, we've set up a $500 million initial fund, and I think we need to see what the scientists determine.
I just mentioned this because your commitment pales in comparison to the $1 billion Exxon spent on the Valdez spill 20 years ago, which was in quite a bit more remote location, and fewer people apparently were impacted by that one. So you are going to make all the data from this research available to the public?
It will be fully open and transparent. It won't be BP's data. It will be the data of the scientists involved.
All right, with their names attached.
Absolutely.
I want to switch topics now. The federal government has developed training classes to provide the necessary training for workers and volunteers who are cleaning up the oil from your spills. But we continue to see reports that BP is not following the training guidelines, endangering further the health of these workers now and long into the future. Why are we still hearing these kinds of reports from the people who are out on the water and on the shoreline?
We're doing everything we can to train everyone involved in this as well and as clearly and as properly as we can.
Are you using the federally developed courses?
We are using the OSHA guidelines to establish what is the appropriate training.
Finally, I want to ask you about BP's response plan, which was clearly inadequate. This committee learned this week that the other major oil companies relied on the same response plans that are practically identical to your own. The same contractors seem to have written your plan and their plans. They hired the same contractors, apparently, as you did. And you all appear to have the same technical experts and the very same response commitment. Now, if this bill had happened to a different oil company, do you have any reason to think that they would have responded more effectively than BP has?
I can't really comment on that. All I can say is that we have initiated the biggest spill response in the history, not only of America, but of the world. It involves thousands of vessels, 35,000 people. It is the largest activity of its kind ever conducted.
I appreciate that. The federal government of this country has also initiated the largest response that we have ever initiated on behalf of any kind of natural disaster or man-made disaster in the history of this country as well. But finally, back to my original question on that topic, Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, was asked the same question that I just asked you. He said that Exxon, his own company, is not prepared to deal with a large spill if it happens to them. He also said that the response capability to prevent the impacts of a spill doesn't exist. Now, bear in mind, this is the same response training manual, response manual that your company has. And with respect to his own, he says the impacts of a spill, the capability does not exist and probably never will. My question to you, do you agree with Mr. Tillerson about this?
I agree that there are many missings in our ability to respond to an incident of this type, and there will be many learnings to be had from this incident and how we can build better response capability in the future. And as I said, we are doing an extraordinary spill response, and I regret that it hasn't been more successful so far than any of us would want.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Capps. Mr. Gonzalez for questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, let me ask you, there's a 6-month moratorium on deep water drilling. Do you think that's reasonable under the circumstances?
I think it's important that the lessons from this are learnt, and clearly that's a decision for the authorities to take, not for me. But it's clearly important that...
Oh, no, I'm not asking you to make the decision. I'm just asking your own opinion based on your expertise and I mean, your position. I would assume you would have an opinion of whether that's a prudent thing to be doing.
I believe it is prudent for the industry to take stock of what has happened here before it moves forwards.
Well, you know, there are calls to move expeditiously to lift that ban after accomplishing whatever is supposed to be accomplished in order to give people peace of mind that as we drill, we're not going to have a recurrence. So when do you think it would be appropriate to consider lifting the moratorium?
I don't think I can make a judgment on that today. I think that's something...
What would common sense tell you?
I think when we've understood clearly what happened and understood clearly what better response is required in the event that something like this ever happened again.
I'm hoping that everybody is going to be on that same page because it's fundamentally sound. Now, we've had other members that made reference to the hearing we had a couple of days ago, and I'm sure you've already spoken to Mr. McKay and such, but Shell, Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, they all said, now I will tell you this though, when I asked them if they could give me 100% assurance that nothing like this would happen when they're drilling in deep water, they wouldn't give me, what they would say is, we do it safely, we do it safely. Human experience is that there are no 100% assurances about any activity. And all I was trying to get is that let's be honest with the American people that there's risk. There's risk, there's risk, and it's calculated risk. And if we can provide enough assurances that it's a risk worth taking, then we'll be out there, won't we? Well, they wouldn't do that, believe it or not, and I'm hoping that you won't play that same game. But what they did say is it would never have happened because their manner and fashion of drilling is different than what you were doing. Now, I don't want to start a big war among you guys, but do you really believe that the way they explore and drill in deep water is substantially different than what you were doing out there?
Not to my knowledge.
I tend to agree with you. So let's talk about planning. And I think Ms. Capps pointed out something that was really important as far as with Exxon. What he actually said was, we couldn't deal with it if something like that happened, which is not an incredible statement to make, isn't it? The fact that you're willing to expose that kind of risk, and if worst case scenario did develop, you wouldn't know what to do. So let's go back to 2003. The Society of Petroleum Engineers and the International Association of Drilling Contractors reported, quote, no blowout has yet occurred in ultra-deep water, water depths of 5,000 feet or greater. But statistics show it is likely to happen. Are we ready to handle it? Well, we know the answer is no, but at that time, they said it was likely to happen. Have you ever read anything like that in all these years, that it was likely to happen?
I haven't read that article, I'm afraid.
Did you believe it was likely to happen?
I did not believe it was likely to happen. It was a risk that was identified as the highest risk by BP across the corporation. It was a risk that was identified as the highest risk by our exploration and production unit. And we believed that the risk mitigant was the so-called fail-safe mechanism of the blowout preventer.
Well, this blowout preventer, and it's the ultimate fail-safe, and I know that you keep using that term, and it comes back to somewhat what haunts you, but I am curious about blowout preventers and the difference, and I was noticing, my staff was able to give me some information. If you have a certain per square inch blowout preventer, shallow water, 10,000 pounds per square inch. Deep water, 15,000 pounds per square inch. Now, I'm not an expert, I don't know. Why? What's the difference as you go into depth? Why a greater capacity?
Because of the pressure of the reservoirs that we're drilling.
Which then leads me to the logical. What do you think you're dealing with at that depth?
We know
as far as pounds per square inch.
We know that we're dealing with a reservoir with a pressure of around between 11 and 12,000 pounds per square inch, and we have a blowout preventer rated to £15,000 per square inch. I believe that's correct.
Okay. Cameron, I don't know if it's Cameron that builds these blowout preventers. That's a company that someone told me that's, and they're working on a 20,000 pound per square inch preventer. I mean, you're aware of that?
I am, yes.
And they actually said this: while there's much discussion and an ongoing effort to provide guidance for equipment greater than 15,000 pounds per square inch, in the interest of expediency, it was decided within Cameron to apply current design codes and practices. The 20,000 pound per square inch EVO blowout preventer was designed, tested, and qualified to API, and I'm not sure what all that means, 16A 3rd edition, meaning basically, but for the sake of expediency, does concern me. Why are y'all looking at 20,000 pounds per square inch when you believe what you already have at 15,000 exceeds what you really is required?
I think that's, I'm not certain, but I think that's referring to blowout preventers for reservoirs with even greater pressure. I do believe that one of the most important things to come from this incident is the requirement for the industry to step back and redesign the fail-safe mechanism it uses to prevent accidents of this sort. We need a fundamental redesign of the blowout preventer. It's something that BP is going to take a very active role in. We've already begun that process with a number of academic institutions and a number of contractors in the industry.
And I thank the Chairman for his patience. Mr. Hayward, we usually say better late than never, but not this time. I yield back.
Mr. Gonzalez, before Mr. Hensley, we should, for the record keeping, Mr. Scalise had submitted a CD and a resolution there from the State Senate. He will provide copies for the record, so with unanimous consent, they'll be made part of his questioning and be made part of record within 10 days, without objection. So ordered. Mr. Hensley, questions, please.
Thank you. Mr. Hayward, something you said earlier was really quite astounding to me. You said that there was no evidence to date that there'd been any decision made based on cost, that no decisions had been made in an effort to reduce costs. And I want to go through this because there's something I think that's quite pivotal in this investigation. The facts are clear that you hired Halliburton to give you advice about this. Mr. Gagliano, an expert in the field, did an analysis and concluded you needed 21 centralizers to make sure that this rig was safe. And just to relieve any doubt as to why that's important, the American Petroleum Institute recommended practice 65 says, quote, if casing is not centralized, it may lay near or against the borehole wall. It is difficult, if not impossible, to displace mud effectively from the narrow side of the annulus if casing is poorly centralized. This results in bypassed mud channels and inability to achieve zonal isolation, close quote. So the expert said you need 21. Then, and if we can put up the first slide, a BP employee essentially wrote to that expert and said, well, we've only got 6, and we don't have time to deal with this problem. Now, time to British Petroleum was money. This rig was 45 days late. It cost you $500,000 a day, and people's obvious attention were about time, which meant money. So what happened then? Well, another British Petroleum person sent a memo saying, we really need to follow the model here. He kicked it up to Mr. Guide. If we could have the second slide, Mr. Guide came back and said, I don't like the fact this is going to take 10 hours to do. Even though another British Petroleum person had said, we're going to fly 15 things in. They can be here tomorrow morning. Mr. Guide said, I don't like the 10 hours. And it didn't happen. And then the next response from British Petroleum, next slide please, was for an email from Mr. Kokalis, sort of reprimanding another BP person saying, even if the hole is perfectly straight, a straight piece of pipe, even in tension, will not seek the perfect center of the hole unless it has something to centralize it, meaning you've got to have the right centralizers. But he went on to say this, but who cares? It's done, End of story. We'll probably be fine, and we'll get a good cement job. What happened then, that's not quite the end of the story. Mr. Gagliano then ran further computer models, and he concluded, the last slide, please. He concluded, and this is hard to read, but I'll read it. He concluded that this well is considered to have a severe, and severe is all capitalized in his memo, gas flow problem. Now, it's very clear to me, reading this clear evidence, that in fact decisions were made because of cost, because people didn't want to wait to get the centralizers that was needed to safely do this job. So your statement that there's no evidence that cost led to shortcuts just doesn't ring true with me. Isn't it pretty clear that there were cost decisions made that had suboptimal, at best, number of centralizers and placement in this well?
I don't want to be evasive or difficult, but I genuinely believe that until we've understood all of the things that contributed to this accident, it's not easy to say. What I would say is if there is evidence that costs were put ahead of safety, I would both be deeply disturbed and we would take action.
So let me ask you about that action. We just read these emails. Everybody in this room knows what happened reading these emails. You know what happened reading these emails. Are you going to call the employees involved when you leave this meeting and say, because you're drilling places all over the world right now, this is an ongoing operation, and tell them they got to change their attitude? Are you going to take action based on these emails today?
We will take action based on our investigation, which puts all of this together, and as it unveils clear conclusions, we will take action on them.
Let me suggest another action. We asked British Petroleum what it spent on research and development regarding safer offshore drilling technologies. You gave us the number. It was about $10 million a year. That represents 0.0033%, 0.0033% of British Petroleum revenues. That doesn't sound like an adequate prioritization. How does it compare to your compensation?
In what respect? Is the question, excuse me?
Yeah, British Petroleum is investing about $10 million a year in safer drilling technology. How does that $10 million a year compare to your compensation last year, for instance?
My compensation last year was $6 million.
Forbes reports it at 33. There must be some misunderstanding then. Is that appropriate? The stock options don't count?
My compensation last year I think was recorded at $6 million.
Do you think British Petroleum ought to make a larger investment of its significant gross revenues in developing safer drilling technology? And do you think you owe that to the American people at this point?
The answer to that is yes, and we undoubtedly will do that on the back of this accident.
We hope that that will be expeditious and successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Inslee. Mr. Malonsong for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Mr. Hayward, how many deep water operations do y'all have, BP, around the world? How many rigs that you're operating?
I don't know the precise number, but it's probably the order of 15 or so.
15 or so. Is there, one of the things I've run into, and Mr. Scalise alluded to it, we've had in my office over 600 requests for submissions for products, ideas, concepts, ways to cap the wells, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, and of course because of ethics, we can't and won't go in and make anybody meet with anybody. So we just refer them into them. The best I can tell is that maybe 3 out of the 600 plus have received an email back, thank you for your submission, boom, no thank you for anything else. There seems to be a closed loop of vendors that you're dealing with, which my frustration is that the hole is still wide open. And when this accident first occurred, everyone said, we're going to take whatever ideas, the suggestions, or whatever. I mean, the cofferdam, the top hat, whatever. But I've seen some people that have called me, and we've referred them in, and they've never heard once from your company. Is this just, if you're not a vendor with us before this occurred, then we're not dealing with you? Or are you going to only the vendors and allowing them to select who they're going to deal with? And my reason for this is because if there are good ideas out there, why isn't somebody looking at them?
We are trying very hard to engage with everyone who has a good idea. We have been, quite frankly, inundated with hundreds of thousands.
Oh, and I know there's tremendous amount. I mean, I know the first one that I saw was close your sheets around a cord and hang it with your milk cartons to catch off. So I understand that. Those are easy to go through. Let me shift to another gear. Do you believe that this administration's moratorium is a result of the tragedy that occurred on Deepwater Horizon? The fact that they put it in was strictly because of what went wrong in Deepwater.
I don't know that, but I believe that's the case, and I think it's probably the right thing to do until such time as we have greater clarity.
Yeah, well, you know, and I agree with that, and I don't agree with the moratorium, but because, and as I've expressed to my friends, it's really difficult for us in Louisiana to stand in oil and say we'll take more oil, but it's because of the economy, it's because of the jobs. I've supported the industry, I support the people, but it makes sense that BP bear the responsibility of the economic hardship associated with this moratorium. I think y'all put $100 million aside for lost jobs. I'm told that in a given month, I don't know if this is just Louisiana, or offshore, but it's about $350 million a month in wages. Are you and your company going to take responsibility and make sure that these companies that fold up, or these companies that have financial hardships, and particularly their employees that they're going to start laying off, are going to be compensated in some way?
We've made a contribution, having been asked to by the government, to a fund which will be part of the funding for that issue.
Do you think $100 million is adequate? And you've been in the oil business for quite a while. Those are good paying jobs. That's why we want to keep them. But do you think that contribution is adequate for the...
We've made a contribution, and we've set aside $20 billion for claims.
Well, $20 billion is for everybody else that's businesses and otherwise. I'm concerned also with them. You know, Mrs. Rostow and Mrs. Kemp were in Chalmette the other day. Very brave women, especially so soon after the deaths of their spouses. And, you know, after hearing Ms. Rostow and Ms. Kemp share with us questions they had for your company, I'd like to hear maybe your response. Ms. Rostow's husband told her about the problems on the rig, that the well was losing a lot of mud. That's the sort of detail that may not have come to your attention, but it was well known among workers on the rigs as a sign of a problem. She wants to know, and she asked this question at the hearing, is why your company wasn't working harder to fix the problems on the rig in the weeks before the explosion? Why wasn't your company prepared for a blowout?
I think, as I've said all along today, we want to understand exactly what happened such that we can take the right actions going forwards. And I'm not aware of that, what you've just raised, but the investigation will determine what or not, what the multiple investigations will determine.
The investigation are not going to bring back those 11 men to their kids. Not only were these women concerned about your company's preparedness, they were also concerned about your company's values. They wanted to ensure that rigs were kept safe and told us that BP should be held accountable for not protecting their husband. Mrs. Kemp asked why money is more important than someone's life And so I guess on behalf of Ms. Kemp, how do you respond to that?
It isn't. It absolutely is not. As I have made clear since I've been in this role, it's something I've believed in for a very long time. The priority for everyone involved in these operations is safety. That doesn't come before anything, not anything. It's something that I believe personally very passionately.
The women talked about in their testimony, I'm sorry, I've gone over my time.
Finish your question.
Yes. The women talked about in their testimony that their husbands worked for the drilling rig company for Transocean, and that they pushed safety, they pushed safety, they pushed safety. But in discussions in weeks prior to the explosion, their husbands talked about BP waving, saying, keep going, keep doing. And I mean, I've heard as growing up in South Louisiana about the tube pusher or the drilling foreman and the company guys getting in fist fights. Was there any instances, to your knowledge, or have you discovered that there was a direct order given by BP that says, keep going, I don't care what's going wrong?
I have not seen any evidence of that whatsoever, and I believe that the operation on the rig in the days leading up to the incident and in that day was carried out because everyone agreed on the rig to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Melonsong. Ms. Castor for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, I'd like to start out by expressing the anger and frustration of the hardworking people of my home state of Florida at the catastrophe BP has rendered upon our state and all the small businesses, the fishermen, the mom and pop hotel owners. You know, we were just coming out of the most severe recession in our lifetimes that happened in 2007. Things were getting a lot better. So this is like a sucker punch to the gut to learn that this tragedy is a result of BP elevating profit considerations over safety. You know, for a decade, many in Florida have opposed this drumbeat to bring the oil rigs closer to our beaches. Over time, we haven't industrialized our coastline like other states. We rely on tourism and clean beaches and clean water. And we've really fought it off, even in the face of very well-paid lobbying campaigns and ad campaigns, and with a lot of representations that this is safe. This is safe technology, whether it's in deep water or in shallow water. So, Mr. Hayward, I'm trying to understand how BP either was so unprepared for the possibility of a blowout or ignored the risks, because according to the Minerals Management Service study conducted in 2007, 126 blowouts have occurred at offshore drilling facilities on the outer continental shelf since 1971. In 1979, a blowout at the Ixtoc oil well in the Gulf of Mexico created a disaster that flowed continuously for 290 days. And Mr. Hayward, you've said that the chances of a blowout and explosion like the one that sank the Deepwater Horizon rig were 1 in a million. But over the past 40 years, there have been 126 blowouts in the U.S. waters alone. That's roughly 3 blowouts per year. How could an average of 3 blowouts every single year for the past 40 years not have registered as more than 1 in a million chance risk for your company?
With respect, Congressman, I think what I said was that the integrity rating of the blowout preventer was of the order of 10 to the minus 5, 10 to the minus 6. That is to say that it was designed to fail between 1 in 100,000 and 1 in a million times.
And that's an acceptable risk.
It is the risk that BP and the industry more broadly use to assess the fail-safe mechanism called the Blowout Preventer.
I know you rely on these blowout preventers and you call them fail-safes, but they're not fail-safes at all in the face of what we've discovered through our committee's examination and the statistics here. This committee has reviewed BP's regional oil spill response plan for the Gulf of Mexico, and not one time in the 582-page plan does BP lay out a method for controlling a subsea gusher after a blowout has occurred. And your company conducted its planning as if an uncontrolled subsea blowout wasn't even a possibility. In a recent interview with the Financial Times, you admitted what is undoubtedly true is that we did not have the tools you would want in your toolkit. My question to you is very simple. Why not? Why weren't you prepared? Why did you elevate profits over safety?
I don't believe we did elevate profits over safety. What I was referring to in that article was the very complicated engineering problem we were faced with after the rig sank attached to its riser. So we had a well, a riser, and a rig on the floor, and we didn't have the pieces of equipment instantly available to cut the riser, to cut off the top of the riser, and find a way to intervene on the wellhead. And that is indeed true.
Mr. Hayward, for years, big oil companies and your allies have claimed that drilling is safe, and you want to come closer to Florida beaches, and you say it's safe, deep or shallow, that there are no problems. But on the other hand, we've heard over and over again over the last couple of months, oh, this is complex and this is dangerous. It's dangerous to drill miles below the ocean. And BP officials have said it's like operating in outer space. And given the difficulties and complexities, what we really knew, what you knew about the risks, I can't understand why you all would assume that nothing could go wrong. So the doublespeak is rather tiresome. I'm dismayed and disheartened by what has happened and the elevation of profit over safety. And I can only hope that this disaster will motivate us to reassess our priorities and implement a clean energy policy for this country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, that concludes questions for everybody of the committee. There's a few more questions. There's a couple of members who have a couple of follow-up questions, so we're going to go a quick second round if we may. So I'll start with Chairman Waxman, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, you said your priority, your top focus is on safety, and you feel very passionate about it. Except for your statement to that effect, I see, as you've said over and over again today, no evidence of that. You and other senior officials seemed oblivious to what was happening on the Deepwater Horizon rig. You weren't following the progress of the well. You weren't aware of the risks that were being taken. In answers to questions, you said that your top officials under you, Mr. Inglis and Mr. Suttles, you would be surprised if they were following the happenings on the rig. You said you couldn't answer for them, but you would be surprised if they had been following the activities on the drilling rig. So who was following the activities on the drilling rig? You said there were people there who were the experts in their field. I just find it shocking that that when the potential consequences of a mistake on a deep water rig are so enormous, and you have such a high, passionate commitment to safety, that you seem so removed. I think operating in a deep water environment is like operating in outer space, and yet you seem to think that all is going to be taken care of in time. Now, you said there's a team of the best minds in the world working on how to stop the oil spill. Where were the best minds in your company paying attention before the spill? You were oblivious, and so were other senior officials. And I think this was a fundamental mistake in management. Let me ask you that. Do you think there was a fundamental mistake in management not to know?
I think, as I've said, that we've made it very clear that the focus in the company is on safety. What management can do is ensure that the right people with the right skills are in place, the right systems and processes are in place, and the right priorities are in place, and the right investment is available to ensure that the plant that we are operating has integrity.
So you felt confident that the people that were making these decisions, and we went through 5 in our letter to you, and many members asked you about some of these decisions, that the right people were making those decisions?
I believe that the right people were making those decisions.
And you have no evidence they didn't make the right decision. That seems to be your position today. Is that right?
I think at this stage in the investigation, it's premature to draw conclusions as to what was and was not the right decision.
Okay, so it's premature. What investigation or investigations are taking place to determine these facts?
There is the BP investigation, there's a Marine Board investigation, and the Presidential Commission.
And are you going to be cooperating with all of them?
We are, as we have, Mr. Chairman, cooperated with your committee.
Well, I question how cooperative you've been with our committee, because I've heard very little answers to the questions from you today, to the questions raised by our colleagues. When you were asked whether BP made a mistake in well design, you said you haven't reached a conclusion yet. When Mr. Dingell asked whether costs were a factor in your decisions, you said you didn't know because you weren't there. When Mr. Doyle asked you who made the well design decisions, you said you didn't know. Our committee is doing an investigation. Now, the reason we're doing an investigation is we want to know how this happened so that we can make changes in the law and the procedures if we're going to allow further drilling. Don't you think you ought to be more forthcoming with us?
We will be as forthcoming as we can be, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, give me the time horizon for your investigation. When will you have that completed? You've already had 60 days to do it. Is it going on now?
It's ongoing, and we want to have access to all of the evidence before we make final determinations. But as we have made very clear...
Give me an estimate of when that will be concluded.
Well, one of the most important elements in this is the blowout preventer. It remains on the seabed, and it needs to be examined.
Okay, so we'll put that aside. How about the other decisions before the explosion, about the casing, about the centering of the well, about all the other things that have been raised? Have you reached any tentative conclusions that you could share with us?
As we shared with you recently, we've identified 7 areas that are areas of focus in our investigation, and we will continue to share our understanding and our thinking with you as that develops.
Mr. Inslee asked you if there was any action that appeared, if there was any action to save money. And you said there's no evidence of that. I can't believe you said there's no evidence of that. There's evidence. You want to know more about it, but there's certainly evidence to that effect, isn't there?
There were decisions taken by the people at the time, and some of them, sitting here today, appear they may have been to do with money, but it's not clear. The decision,
well, evidence is not conclusive, but there's evidence.
The decision, for example, to run a long string versus a liner was, as it shows in the document that you highlighted to me, a decision to do with the long-term integrity of the well.
There's evidence, and an evidence may point in a certain direction. There may be evidence that points in another direction. So you take the evidence and reach a conclusion based on the preponderance of the evidence. But that's not to say there's not evidence when we have some of these clear examples. Let me ask you this. You can't give us a time for when this investigation is going to be complete. So we're relying on you to do your own investigation. Why should we rely on you to do your own investigation? I don't think you have a terrific record of reliability that should give us comfort to have us step back and just wait to get answers from you until you've done your own investigation. Why should we rely on that?
Well, we're clearly not the only people doing an investigation. There are many people doing investigations. All I have committed is that as our investigation proceeds, we will share with you all of our findings and all of the data and all of the information.
Well, let me just say in conclusion, we delayed this hearing today so you could be prepared to answer our questions. We sent you our questions in advance. You've consistently ducked and evaded our questions. There may be some reason you think this approach makes sense, but your evasion will make our job more difficult. It will impede our understanding of what went wrong and will make it harder for us to draft appropriate reforms. I think that's regrettable and an unfortunate approach for you to take to the work of this committee of the United States Congress. And I'll look forward to seeing what you come up with, but we're going to get evidence, and I'd like you to submit for the record the names of the individuals who made those decisions in each of the areas that were under discussion in the letter we sent you. Would you be willing to do that?
We'll make that available to you.
Thank you.
As we have made everything, to my knowledge, available to you.
And maybe they'll have some answers they can share with us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Barton for questions.
Thank you, Chairman Stupak. We're about to finish up this hearing. We do appreciate your patience in listening to all the various members of the subcommittee. What one or two recommendations are you prepared to give about what we could do to prevent a future accident of this type? Now that you know what you know and you've listened to what the Congress knows here today, are there one or two things that you'd like to suggest for consideration to prevent an accident of this type from happening in the future?
I believe that the most important one is to take the fail-safe mechanism called the blowout preventer and design it such that it is genuinely fail-safe. The reality in all industrial accidents is that they are always a combination of equipment failure and human judgment. And the most important thing is to have in place a system that is genuinely fail-safe. And it is clear, based on our experience of this accident, that the current design basis of the blowout preventer being used in the deep water, not just in this case but across the world, is not as fail-safe as we believed it to be. And I believe that's a very important lesson that the industry needs to grasp along with the relevant regulatory agencies.
Much has been made of the complexity and the risk associated with drilling these deep wells. Would you care to, I've asked some of your subordinates to give us some sort of assessment of the potential size of this particular field or this particular well. I've asked the Texas Railroad Commission and the Texas U.S. Geological Survey what the largest onshore oil well in Texas in its history of over 100 years has been, and with the exception of the initial discovery at Spindletop in 1901, we can't find a record of any well onshore Texas, which has been the #1 oil-producing state in the country for over 100 years, with the exception of a few years where Alaska at Prudhoe Bay at its peak, that flowed at 50,000 barrels a day. And the latest estimates are that this well, in this condition, could be flowing as much as 50,000 barrels a day. If you extrapolate that on an annual basis, that's over 100 million barrels of oil a year. So could you give us some assessment of why BP and other companies go to such extraordinary measures to drill in these areas? What is it you think you found or are hoping to find beneath the Gulf of Mexico?
In the instance of this well, we believe that the discovery was of the order of 50 million barrels.
50 million?
50 million barrels. That is our estimate of the discovery, the size of the discovery that this well made.
So if you, at the rate it's flowing, it ought to peter out fairly quickly. 50,000 barrels a day is 350,000 barrels a week, which is 3.5 million in 10 weeks, which is 35 million in 100 weeks. So within I was told that it was on the order of magnitude of 500 million barrels.
That's not correct, Congressman. This is a discovery based on clearly on the well and the seismic information we have available to us, which is...
So it's just that the extreme pressure, I mean, it couldn't flow at this rate in full production.
That's
Is that
correct.
a fair statement?
That's correct.
Would you care to tell us what it would flow at? What you expected it to flow at per day?
I think as a producing well, properly completed, we would expect it to be between perhaps 15 and 25,000 barrels a day.
Okay. And lastly, with the moratorium that's currently in existence in the Gulf of Mexico, for the deep areas, the 6-month moratorium, I know you have to do and we want you to stop this spill and clean it up, but there are other areas that could be explored. What other areas might BP go to instead of in the Gulf of Mexico?
Well, we have deep water drilling, exploration and production operations in a large number of locations around the world, in West Africa, Brazil, Egypt, to name but three, as well as the UK and the North Sea.
So you would focus on those areas if this moratorium continues?
We are focused today on the relief wells.
I understand
and
that.
dealing with all of that.
And you should be. You better be.
I haven't thought, frankly, beyond dealing with the relief wells in terms of our activity in the Gulf of Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. Mr. Hayward, in line of questioning throughout the day, you referred to the blowout preventer, Mr. Gonzalez, when he asked you questions, and Mr. Barton just asked some questions on there. Back on June 4th, you wrote an editorial to the Wall Street Journal. In talking about the blowout preventer, you stated, "We in the industry have long had great confidence in the blowout preventer as the ultimate fail-safe piece of safety equipment, yet on this occasion it failed with disastrous consequences." Do you still believe the blowout preventer should be considered the ultimate fail-safe?
I believe so. Either a blowout preventer or some similar mechanism.
Well, I'm a little surprised by your comments because the committee received the document, and you have the document binder right there, you may want to refer to it, that evaluated the blowout preventer used on Deepwater Horizon rig. The document was prepared in 2001. It's tab number 14 right there, and we can put it up on the screen. In 2001, when Transocean bought the blowout preventer. I want to show you the executive summary in which BP participated with it in this review. And it says, engineering and operations personnel identified 260 failure modes. You see where it says that towards about the top third of it? Okay? So BP engineers, your engineers, helped to identify these 260 failure modes. So how can you write, or how can you testify, but how can you write in the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago that you thought the blowout preventer was the ultimate fail-safe when your own engineers examined the blowout preventer 9 years ago and found 260 failure modes in it? So how could you ever say it's a ultimate fail-safe?
I haven't seen this document previously. I apologize for that, but I haven't.
Okay. Well, now knowing there's 260 fail-safe modes in this blowout preventer that was on Deepwater Horizon, it never was the ultimate fail-safe, was it?
The blowout preventer is designed to be the ultimate fail-safe. That is its design basis. It's the basis on which the industry has operated for 30 years in deep water.
Then let me ask you this. As the CEO, why then would your company change the blowout preventer fail-safe methods or mechanism? For instance, we found other things that showed that this blowout preventer was not fail-safe. At our first hearing, May 12th, I asked and revealed that the blowout preventer had been modified in ways which would increase the risk that it would blow out, that wouldn't work, okay? One modification, for instance, was to remove the important variable bore ram and replaced it with a test ram that made it ineffective in case of an emergency. At our hearing, I asked Mr. McKay, who's the president of BP America, about these modifications. He testified under oath. He took the oath and he said he didn't know anything about modifications. We've since learned that BP approved modifications despite being warned that it would reduce the safety of the blowout preventer. I'd like to display, and again, it's tab number 10, right in your book right there. Here's the letter from 2004 from Transocean sent to BP that BP signed and acknowledged. And it says, BP acknowledges that the conversion you ask for, the conversion will reduce the built-in redundancy of the BOP, thereby potentially increasing the contractor's risk profile. So what does that mean, BP, that you reduce the build-out, you reduce the built-in redundancy, increase your risk? You ask for modifications which limit the redundancy and increase your risk, right? BP did.
Again, I haven't seen this document previously. What I do know that there were modifications made to the blowout preventer. In particular, a test bore ram was added.
And wired
wrong. It was
wrong.
not a subtraction, it was an addition to the blowout preventer, is my understanding.
But here's our problem. You write the editorial, say this is the ultimate fail-safe. We find out it's modified. We ask your representative, Mr. McKay, he says no, no. We get done with the hearing, we get documents showing, in fact, BP asked for it. BP was warned that the ultimate fail-safe system, the way BP wanted it modified, will increase the risk of a problem. And that's the one we have here in Deepwater Horizon. So how can we write an editorial? You can't have it both ways here. How can we write an editorial saying, oh, this is the ultimate system, and even your own engineer said there's 260 different ways it can fail, then you add some more to it. Go ahead.
The blowout preventer is designed to be the fail-safe mechanism in the drilling industry.
Correct.
That has been the case since blowout preventers were created.
But you're the CEO. You've been head of exploration, drilling, all this. Does it make sense to you that this is the ultimate fail-safe system when there's 260 different ways it can go wrong, plus your company modifies it, which increased the risk of things going wrong?
Well, the fact is it is the ultimate fail-safe mechanism.
Well, let me ask you this. In November, okay, this well, you started drilling it last fall, the Macondo well last fall, using a different rig to Marianas. It was harmed, it was damaged in the hurricane. So you replaced it with Deepwater Horizon. In November of last year, Transocean pulled out the blowout preventer from the ocean floor because its shear rams weren't working. The lower annular would not close, and the upper annular had been stripped through during a well control event. We know that BP was aware of this because Transocean, and again, it's document number 12 there in our binder, reflect conference calls with BP about the problems with this blowout preventer. In addition, Transocean records indicate the incident state that the estimated downtime forced by the malfunction is a conservative 10 days at $444,111 per day, or $4.4 million as it shows. So how can you say blowout preventers are fail-safe devices when the blowout preventer you're using on the well in November had to be removed because of malfunctions?
Well, of course, the answer is they are the fail-safe mechanism, and when problems are identified with them, they're rectified, and I believe that is what is taking place.
Well, but, you know, you can't have it both ways here. This accident occurs. You have a blowout preventer you know had 260 different errors in it, way it could go wrong. You modify it. You pull it in November of 2009. You see there's all kinds of problems. This accident happens. So you write this editorial in the Wall Street Journal saying, hey, it ain't our fault, it's mechanical. You said earlier, accident is because of mechanical failure and human judgment, human error. Seems like we have more human error than mechanical because the mechanical safeguard, the ultimate fail-safe, really wasn't an ultimate fail-safe. They can fail in many ways, and that's exactly what went wrong here, and that's what happened on the 20th. Correct?
What is clear is that the ultimate fail-safe failed to operate in this case. That is absolutely clear.
Why would a company like BP, when you're doing this deep water drilling, modify the ultimate fail-safe if it's supposed to protect the American people and our environment? Why would you modify it, increase the risk of problems? You knowing it, you sign a document, the contractor warns you not to do it, and you still do it. That's the problem we're having.
As I said, the blowout preventer is the fail-safe mechanism. It's designed to be exactly that.
Questions, Mr. Burgess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, it's been a long day. You said earlier, if I recall correctly, that everyone in your organization in the culture of safety not only had the right to curtail operations, but the obligation if they saw something going on that was not safe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in response to a question from the other side of the dais, and I don't remember who asked it, you also made the assertion that the right people were making the decisions on the rig. Did I hear that correctly?
I believe that is the case.
Who is Donald Vedrine?
He's the well site leader on one of the well site leaders on the Deepwater horizon.
So he was referred to in a Wall Street Journal article as the company man or the BP man on the Deepwater horizon the day of the blowout. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with the article. It was in the Wall Street Journal, and this has been several weeks ago, May 27th, I believe. They talked about a skirmish between some of the Transocean folks, the chief engineer or chief mechanic on the Deepwater horizon, and the rig's top manager, Jimmy Harrell. Are you familiar with that discussion that apparently heard quite a heated discussion? I think Mr. Gonzalez was actually the one that brought it up.
It is my understanding, Congressman, that that account has been contradicted under oath in the Marine Board investigation, and that there was no debate or skirmish or any other heated discussion. That is what, I can't recall exactly who it was, but under oath at the Marine Board investigation, I believe it was the Transocean tool pusher, testified that there was no either heated discussion or debate or anything else.
That would be the tool pusher, Miles Ezell?
I believe that's the case.
Wasn't Dewey Rivette, because he died in the accident, and he was one of the other witnesses to the altercation. Well, if this occurred, even if it only partially occurred, it just seems like there was enough discussion that someone should say, wait, let's not go forward with this because someone, at least some of our number, feel it's unsafe. And again, you said that the man would have the obligation, not just the right to say let's halt, he'd have the obligation to say, well, let's get everyone on the same page with this. Am I wrong to assume that?
You're not wrong, and I think you can only conclude they all believed that it was right to proceed.
Are we ever going to get a chance to talk to Mr. Vedrine? Will BP make him available to our committee?
If you call him, of course.
Let me ask you another question. You said in response to some information that came up that there was no evidence that BP was focusing on the cost of drilling, and yet, March 2010 strategy presentation, you stated, we have added exploration resources efficiently. Our discovery cost was $1.40 per barrel in 2009. This is consistent with our track record over the last 5 years of having the lowest discovery cost in the industry. Now, certainly that would be enviable, except in a culture of safety, I mean, I might even spend $1.45 or $1.47 instead of just $1.40 if it meant that it was a safe procedure. So was maintaining the lowest cost discovery in the industry possibly a factor in the decision making on this well?
None whatsoever.
But
that metric is created by dividing the volume of barrels discovered by the costs. And what it talks to is the success of our exploration program and the scale of the volume that we discovered, not anything to do with costs.
Well, but it does have something to do with cost. Now, it's been reported that completion of the Mankato well was running behind schedule. Is this accurate?
I believe it was running behind schedule, that's correct.
How far behind schedule?
I don't know the precise number.
What does it cost today to run a rig like that?
That sort of rig, fully built up cost is probably $1 million a day or thereabouts.
So even a couple of days over is a significant a cost driver on that $1.40 a barrel minimal discovery cost in the industry.
With respect, Congressman, the most important thing was that actually we'd made a discovery and we wanted to secure it in the proper way. And that was going to be a far bigger driver of anything, any value that the company was going to create than the costs of the operation.
I don't
far,
disagree.
far larger.
I don't disagree with that, but oh, how I wish that that had been the case as we're, hearing after hearing after hearing on this thing, and the darn thing is still bubbling down the bottom of the Gulf. That doesn't seem to be accurate. Is your own investigation looking at the issue of whether or not cost drivers were an issue in the problems that were created?
Our investigation is covering everything.
So it wasn't on your list, but nevertheless, it will be included in your...
Well, my list is the early findings of the investigation in terms of the key areas to focus on. Areas around cement, casing, the integrity test.
Got it.
Well-controlled procedures.
I got it. Now, we're running out of time here, but when you said your investigation was proceeding without privilege early on in the hearing today, so it would also cover the issues of whether or not cost drivers were an issue in creating the problems.
It will cover everything.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just echo what Mr. Scalise said earlier. We get calls all of the day or night. The faxes come in. People have got ideas on how to fix our problem in the Gulf. I really wish you guys would open up an 800 number and take these things and vet them and listen to what people are saying. Americans are terribly, we have a lot of ingenuity in America, and people are watching that thing that Mr. Markey made everyone's computer screen show 24 hours a day. It's driving people crazy to watch that thing bubbling in the Gulf. People are coming to us with solutions. There needs to be a central location. I don't care whether it's you. I don't care whether it's Dr. Chu, but somebody needs to be vetting these things. And if there is a reasonable idea out there, put it to work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Markey for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Mr. Hayward, is the most optimistic date for the relief well to be completed still August?
That is our current timetable.
Is August also the earliest date the leak can be stopped, or will it take more time after the relief well is complete before the flow of oil is permanently halted?
The relief well will halt permanently the flow of oil.
Mr. Hayward, in 2009, an independent firm that BP hired to serve as its ombudsman, headed by former federal judge Stanley Sporkin, substantiated that BP was violating its own policies by not having completed engineering documents on board another BP rig operating in the Gulf of Mexico, the BP Atlantis, when it began operating in 2007. One BP official warned that the absence of these safety documents could lead to catastrophic operator error. Let me read to you from an internal BP email. And this goes from Barry Duff, BP employee, to other engineers at BP. Here's what he said. He said, the P and IDs for subsea are not complete and have not been approved or handed over to operations. The current procedures are out of date. The risk in turning over drawings to the people out on the rig running the Atlantis that are not complete are, number one, the operator, the BP operator, will assume the drawings are accurate and up to date. This could lead to catastrophic operator errors due to their assuming the drawing is correct. Turning over incomplete drawings to the operator, the BP operator, for their use is a fundamental violation of basic document control. Having the project document control person turn over drawings that are not complete places the onus on her that they are the most current version. Currently, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of subsea documents that have never been finalized, yet the facilities have been turned over. Mr. Hayward, BP's managing attorney stated to the Associated Press on May 15th of this year that BP has reviewed the allegations and found them to be unsubstantiated. Mr. Hayward, were all of the engineering documents and drawings necessary to operate the Atlantis rig
safely and fully completed before the Atlantis rig began operating in the Gulf of Mexico?
When this issue emerged, we conducted a full investigation and determined that all of the drawings that were necessary to start up the operation were available to the people starting up the operation at the time the operation started up.
Mr. Hayward, Mr. Duff was relieved of his duties in the middle of August of 2008. A new person was put in charge as a result. His name is Ken Abbott. Ken Abbott has been testifying all day in Washington across the street in the Natural Resources Committee. He's a whistleblower. He got fired 6 months after he replaced Mr. Duff because he raised the very same concerns, that there was not proper documentation on the BP Atlantis. He was fired even though he raised issues that obviously have a lot of resemblance to the kind of attention to the safety protocols that were part of the BP Horizon rig. Is it part of your policy, Mr. Hayward, to fire employees who raise questions about the safety of your rigs?
No, it is not.
Well, Mr. Hayward, I'm afraid that that's what happened to Mr. Abbott, because not only was he fired, but 2 weeks later, they put out and was told that he was just part of a force reduction, but your company then put out an advertisement to hire someone to replace him on that job. Earlier, you said all of the other BP wells in the Gulf of Mexico that had been completed are secure and are safe to operate. Do you still stand by that?
I do.
Now, do you know that Judge Sporkin said that it is not true that the documents were completed when he substantiated Mr. Abbott's allegations? So how do you account for that? That you hire an ombudsman, he's a former federal district court judge, he comes in, he does the evaluation, and he substantiates the whistleblower's allegations. How do you in any way justify then firing the person who actually brought these issues to your attention?
As I said, the investigation concluded that the drawings necessary for startup were on the Atlantis facility. Judge Sporking, our ombudsman, is investigating the issue of unfair dismissal, which is quite appropriate.
Well, I will apply. I ask for you to provide a copy of the investigation which you're conducting, Mr. Hayward, for the record.
We can do that.
Okay, we will put that in the record. I think, Mr. Hayward, that the only thing worse than one BP rig at the bottom of the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico would be two BP rigs at the bottom of the ocean. I think this is just another example of you running through all of the red lights, all of the warnings. Judge Sporkin is one of the most respected people in this city. He has corroborated the charges that were being made by this now fired employee who was raising safety concerns. I am afraid, once again, it's a blistering, scalding indictment of the lack of a culture of safety that you had at BP. And I just think that it is something that has to end before we see another disaster. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Before I go to Mr. Latta, let me ask unanimous consent that we have the document binder be entered into record, provided that the committee staff may redact any information that's business proprietary, relates to privacy concerns, or is law enforcement sensitive.
Mr. Chairman, may I just ask for 30 seconds, one additional question?
Let me finish what I'm doing here.
Okay.
Without objection, the documents will be entered into the record.
May I just ask?
It's going to be really quick, Ed.
Just
You never
20
asked a 30, never asked a 30-second question.
Mr. Hayward, will you shut down? Questions have been answered.
I believe they've been fully resolved, Congressman.
I do not think that that is the case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Not to take time from Mr. Latta. Mr. Latta for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just follow up with some questioning that
Ranking Member Burgess was on talking about the schedule. I guess the first question is, what is the process that BP executives develop when it comes to schedules, especially for the offshore wells in the Gulf? Is there a schedule? Who makes the schedules?
The schedule, the drilling program for the Deepwater, is that the?
Yeah,
Excuse
right.
me. I'm sorry?
Right. Who's in charge of those, the scheduling for those?
The drilling programs are created by the engineering team, overseen by the Vice President for Drilling and Completions and the business unit leader, and in this case, the exploration manager in the Gulf of Mexico.
Now, are you a consultant in the development and maintenance of those schedules?
I'm sorry?
Are you a consultant at all in the development or maintenance of those schedules?
I'm not.
Is there a committee higher up that is then consulted at BP about those schedules?
About the schedules of drilling?
Correct.
There are several groups that would look at the schedules of drilling.
Now, I guess in the corporate structure, how high up would those committees be, or those groups that would be looking at that?
It would be within the Gulf of Mexico business unit.
Let me just ask this. Would a well of this type, being as deep as it is, being as tough as it would be, it sounds like, to drill, would that elevate it to a higher standing that it'd be that folks higher up at BP would be consulted on it, or is it just still kept in the Gulf with that region right there?
The design and operating practices will be signed off at the level of the Vice President of Drilling and Completions in the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay, so you'd never be consulted on that then?
No.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Latta. Mr. Braley for questions, please.
Mr. Hayward, at the beginning of this hearing, I showed you a couple of short video clips from two of the women who testified last week at our field hearing in Chalmette, Natalie Roshtow and Courtney Kemp. And one of the questions they posed during that hearing was what they would tell to their children about why their fathers died on this Deepwater Horizon rig. You began your testimony a very long time ago today with these words: "The explosion and fire aboard the Deepwater Horizon and the resulting oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico never should have happened." What do you think that those two young mothers should tell their children about why this happened, based on what you know?
Based on what I know, that this was a tragic accident involving many failure mechanisms. That is the reality. That is why this happened.
Is there blame to go around among all of the companies that were working on that well site?
I don't believe now is the time to try and apportion blame. I believe now is the time to try and understand what happened.
Well,
And
the reason I'm
the
asking that,
investigations are trying to do.
the reason I'm asking that is because during other congressional hearings there has been finger pointing going on, and I assume you've been following what's been going on in the hearings and are aware of that.
As I said, I don't believe that this is the time to finger point or apportion blame. I believe this is a time to understand fully what caused this accident, such that the industry and BP can learn for the future.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that BP has been taking responsibility for is the cleanup costs and the payment of all legitimate claims. We've heard that phrase over and over again. And we've also seen press accounts where BP spokespeople have said, as the responsible party, we are required to handle those claims, and then we'll wait to some later date to deal with the apportionment of responsibility among the various parties. Are you aware of that?
I am.
Well, let's talk briefly about the claims process and some of the problems that are currently part of that process. One of the things we know is that under the oil pollution claims process, a claimant can't file suit until a presentment of claim is made. Are you familiar with that process?
I'm not familiar with the details, but what I can say is we have set up an independent claims facility under Ken Feinberg. He will have the full authority to adjudicate on claims. Within that system, there will be an opportunity for anyone to appeal to 3 judges. That system does nothing to deny anyone any rights with respect to any other claims process. It is simply a way of expediting the claims process such that it is fair, efficient, and fast.
Okay, I want to talk to you about that, because this is what I've been hearing from people involved in the preliminary claims process with BP. I have been informed that BP's position under their current claims process is that a submission of a claim is not a presentment for the purpose of beginning a claims process under the Oil Pollution Act. And the reason BP has taken that position is because they do not consider it to be for a sum certain if there are future losses that have not yet been determined, or if there are ongoing economic losses with no date certain. Are you aware of this process?
I'm aware in general terms of the process.
Well, do you understand the problem that creates for somebody with an ongoing economic loss like Ronnie Duplessis, the shrimp boat officer who testified at our hearing last week, who is without work because the oil or the fishing beds that he has currently are part of what he does for a living are not available to him?
We are endeavoring, I believe we have put in place a process whereby we pay money and it means nothing about future liabilities.
But my question,
no one has given away the opportunity to claim future liabilities.
I'm not implying that. I'm talking about a process that actually puts money in the hands of people who desperately need it because their income source has been destroyed by this oil disaster at your rig.
Yeah.
You understand their frustration when they've gotten a check, in the case of Mr. Duplessis, for $5,000, which represents a very small amount of the monthly gross income he gets from his business to feed his family?
I understand fully. I've spoken to many people on the Gulf Coast, to fishermen, to shrimpers, to small hotel owners.
So can you understand then, sir, why they are frustrated if BP is taking the position in this claims presentment process that every time they cannot define their future economic loss, they have to submit another claim as soon as that loss becomes defined for a fixed period of time, and then another claim and another? Do you understand how that could be frustrating?
I do, Congressman. And
So
in the course of the last weekend, if you just let me finish, please, we have put in place a process for small businesses where they can project forward for the next month what it is they expect to lose by way of cash flow, and we will pay it now. I'm very conscious of the issue of small businesses who have ongoing cash flow demands. So we are trying very hard to ensure that money is paid in advance for commitments that people have already taken, rather than in arrears. And that is what we will continue to do.
And will that be part of the fund that Judge Feinberg is administering?
That process will be transferred into Ken Feinberg's process, and that is the basis on which we will move forward.
Thank you.
And in the course of the last week, we've paid out over $15 million to small businesses on that basis.
Thank you, Mr. Burley. Mr. Welch for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, can you point to any single bad decision that was made in connection with Deepwater Horizon?
As I've said often today, I'm not prepared to point today with a half-complete investigation as to what was and was not a bad decision. There are many components to this accident to do with, as I've said, the casing, how it was run, the cement job, how it was conducted, integrity tests that may or may not have been well interpreted. At all stages, everyone on the rig decided that the right thing to do was continue. We need to understand how that came about.
No, I understand that. But with the benefit of hindsight and whatever investigatory work has been done, both by you and by others, at this moment, 57 days after this event, is there anything you can identify that was done wrong?
I'm not able to draw that conclusion at this time.
Okay. Well, yesterday, Mr. Hayward, I think BP took a very constructive step in agreeing to deposit $20 billion in an independently administered fund to compensate victims and to pay for the cleanup. It was a first step in establishing confidence in BP, confidence that BP's words would be matched by their deeds. But today, regrettably, your appearance here has done a good deal, and at least for me, to erode that confidence. We know you're not an engineer, and we know that you were not on the Deepwater horizon. But your answer 65 times that you don't know to questions that were reasonably posed by you on both sides of the aisle erodes confidence. It doesn't inspire confidence. You know, the question that any company has to ask itself is whether it has strict procedures in place to make disciplined decisions that give it confidence that at a critical moment where the lives of its workers and the investment of its shareholders is at stake, critical judgment will be exercised. And that's the obligation of the CEO. However it is you accomplish that ability to hold your workers accountable and support them, that is the job of the CEO, whether it's a small company or a large company. And at that very critical moment, when that well was going to be capped and decisions had to be made about the sealing of the well, whether to use a cheaper and quicker casing design, whether to use more or fewer casing centralizers, whether to run a critical cementing test, whether or not to circulate drilling mud, it does not appear that anybody was in charge. And that's the erosion of confidence, because the lack of procedures, the lack of people being in charge and resorting to the least cost alternative clearly played a major role in this catastrophe. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. Mr. Scalise for questions, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, going back through a few more of the questions that we continue to have, why was a cement bond log not performed?
I don't know why a cement bond log wasn't performed. I wasn't there. I didn't take the decision. What I
Technical expert, no? I know you've got a
what I understand from discussion with the investigation team is that the conclusion reached on the rig by the BP Transocean was that they had a good cement job, that they had got returns to the surface, that the right volume had been pumped, and they had pressure integrity.
And they based that
on the basis of those
readings of some other tests that they performed, or they just
on the basis of those three things, they determined that they had a good cement job. And it was on that basis.
Not to, so there's no BP procedure to perform that test. You leave it up to the discretion of the company man on the rig or somebody else on the rig?
There's no requirement to perform a cement bond log.
Are you going to change that policy and make it a requirement?
It's one of the things that we need to look at in the light of this accident.
When we talk about the all these different ideas, and like I said, I just gave you some. We get lots of them. I tried to filter some out. I don't know if you've seen the presentation of people putting hay in the water, and the oil comes onto the hay, and the water doesn't, and then it rolls up, and you can clear that away. All kinds of ideas like that. What is your process for all of these people that are submitting ideas, many of which have tremendous merit, and then none of which we see being used in the water?
Well, I think with respect, we have used many of the ideas that have been submitted, Congressman. We do have a process, and there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, actually, of ideas that have been submitted, and we have a process to work through them and to utilize them. And we've used very many that have been submitted from individuals across the United States.
Well, and hopefully we'll be able to get some more of those implemented because, as I said earlier, there's not enough that you can do. If you've got more ideas, try them all because there's a lot of oil in the Gulf, and if something works, do more of it. If it doesn't work, you can go on to something else. Is that structure just BP's structure? Is there some unified command?
It's part of the unified command structure.
So are there any federal agencies involved in working that?
There's a team of people. So as emails and suggestions come in, they're forwarded to a team of people, and they're evaluated and implemented based on that team of people that sits within the unified command structure.
Okay. Local people that are affected by this, we're still hearing from lots of local people that fishermen that can no longer fish, people that have oyster processing companies, and now some of those oyster beds are closed, so they have no oysters to process. Boat captains. These are all people that don't want to just get some unemployment check. They want to work, but they can't work. Many of them are frustrated that they're not being engaged to work on the cleanup, and they're the ones most vested. They're the ones on the ground who want this cleaned up with the most urgency, and it seems like many of them are frustrated that they're being shut out, and then they're seeing people bust in from out of state that come in the day, and then they're bust out again at night that just don't have the same kind of passion, and it's kind of confusing. Why are they not being employed if they want to work, if they're there on the ground?
Well, we've made every effort to use everyone locally who wants to participate. We have almost 10,000 vessels of opportunity, which are the local fishermen employed in the Vessel of Opportunity program.
And I was notoriously told, and this was reported in many media accounts, but I've actually spoken to the parish official on the ground who actually did this. Just a few weeks ago, there were 50 of those boats, vessels of opportunity, that were contracted by you that were supposed to be putting out boom. Those boats were sitting idle at the dock, not putting out boom as oil was coming into our marsh. And this parish official actually went out and they commandeered a number of those boats and just went and put it out themselves. There's no excuse for that. What kind of method do y'all have in place if you're just giving people a check and telling them to sit the boat at the dock? We don't need the boat at the dock. We need the boat out putting the boom so that the oil doesn't get into the marsh. And again, it gets into this sense of urgency. It's not just about writing checks, and that's important, but it's even more important that the work gets done in a quick time frame. And that's what's not happening. There is no quick turnaround. And then things like that continue to happen. Are you going to change something on the ground to emphasize that it's not just about running a PR campaign? We've got things that have to happen quickly because there just isn't the time for days to go by with these kind of delays.
Our focus is to continue to improve the quality of the response and the engagement of people in the nearshore area. It has been the biggest challenge, and we continue to work it very hard with the incident commander, Thad Allen, and the Coast Guard.
Let me ask, is the casing cracked or damaged below the seafloor?
Well, we don't know that, of course, because we haven't been able to get into the well.
So there's nothing that you've seen that would show that?
We have no way of knowing that.
Okay, and I know, 2 days
Time,
ago,
Steve.
and I apologize.
Go ahead,
but,
one more. Go ahead.
Mr. McKay was here testifying at the same table you're at on Tuesday. He said, quote, "The spill response has been pretty effective," and I strongly disagreed with him in that hearing on Tuesday. I'd like to know if you agree or disagree with his statement that the spill response has been pretty effective.
I think if any oil gets to the shore to impact the environment, that it's not possible to declare a spill response effective. In many dimensions, we have implemented a very, very significant effort. It's been recognized, as I said, by the Coast Guard as beyond anything anyone has ever achieved in the past.
And the disaster is beyond anything ever achieved. So I just hope to give you that sense of urgency. We need the sense of urgency. We can't have days go by. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
There's nothing to yield. Ms. DeGette for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, you told both Mr. Dingell and Mr. Scalise that that the conclusion BP reached was that there was a good cement job, there was no requirement to perform the cement bond log test, and you'd look at whether that needed to be changed in the future. So my question to you is, are you aware that Halliburton's Chief Safety Officer, Tim Probert, told a Senate committee last month that a cement bond log test is, quote, the only test that can really determine the actual effectiveness of the bond between the cement sheets, the formation, and the casing itself? Do you agree with that statement?
I'm aware of his testimony.
And do you agree with that testimony?
I'm not qualified to agree or disagree
Well,
with that statement.
Is your technical expert, Mr. Zaugi, who's here with you today, qualified to answer that question?
I can ask him.
Please. Yes.
Mr. Zangi is not a cement bond expert.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you move the...
Yeah, Mr. Zangi is not a cementing expert, but he is a drilling engineer. And
He's a drilling engineer. And has he had experience with cementing as a drilling engineer?
I'm sure he has.
Okay, but yet he doesn't know whether this test is the only test that can determine the actual effectiveness?
The fact is that the team on the rig concluded that they had 3 other mechanisms to determine that
What were those mechanisms, Mr.
It was
Hayward?
the volume that had been pumped.
I'm sorry?
The volume of cement that had been pumped,
Okay.
which told them essentially where in the well the cement had gone.
Mm-hmm.
The returns to the surface, that's to say the cement had returned to the surface, and a pressure test that confirmed that there was sealing.
But also, as I mentioned in my first round of questioning, Mr. Hayward, the internal document, tab 6, page 9, which I had you refer to, said that the approach, because of the long string approach, that you didn't do the other type of approach, cementing simulations indicate that it's unlikely to be a successful cement job. So was that taken into account when it was determined that the cement was likely to succeed?
I clearly can't know that because I wasn't there. But
Yes,
one
okay.
would assume that the team on the rig...
I'm sorry?
I would assume that the team on the rig looked at the data and determined that they had achieved a successful cement job.
But now they sent the team on the scene, sent the test crew away before the pressure testing was done. So how would they have known that the cement was going to hold before they even did the pressure testing?
I can't answer that question.
Would you mind supplementing your testimony to let us know how they would have known that?
Well, I can't interpret what the people on the rig were thinking at the time the decision was
But you
taken.
could ask them and have them tell us. Would you do that, Mr. Hayward?
We can certainly, as part of the investigation, do that.
Thank you very much. Now, I want to ask you, because previously I asked you how many Deepwater wells that BP had I asked you if you had knowledge of this well, and you said no. How many Deepwater wells has BP drilled since you were CEO of the company in the last 3 or so years?
I don't know the precise number. It's probably of the order of 25 or 30 a year.
You might be surprised to know of the Deepwater wells that it's far fewer number than that. But you don't know the exact number, correct?
I don't know the exact number.
Okay. I want to just ask you one last question. We've been hearing a lot from people, from healthcare workers and from public health folks about the potential health consequences. We've been talking a lot today about the economic losses and this fund to reimburse people for economic losses. I want to ask you, will BP also commit to paying for the long-term healthcare costs incurred by workers and residents of the Gulf as a result of this spill?
Well, we've created a fund of $20 billion to cover the claims.
Let me ask you
resulting
again.
from
Let
this.
me just ask you again. I know there's the fund, and we commend you, and we're glad you did that. But as part of the reimbursements, is BP committed to reimbursing the workers and the residents of the Gulf for their long-term health care costs incurred as a result of this spill? Yes or no?
If the independent adjudicator determines that those are valid claims, they will be paid.
So the only way you intend to pay those claims is if it comes through this fund. Is that your
$20
testimony
billion
today?
is a very large sum of money to pay claims.
I'm sorry?
$20 billion is a very large fund to pay claims from.
It is a large fund, and is it your view that part of what that fund will be used for is to pay people for their long-term health care costs incurred as a result of this spill?
That will be a decision for the independent adjudicator. of
Well,
the
if
fund.
they asked you what you thought, would you say, yes, the health care costs should be paid for from
I
this?
think that's something that I will leave him to decide. That's why we've appointed an independent adjudicator.
So, see, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Just
Yeah.
another minute or
Yeah,
that's gonna
if
be
I may, Mr. Chairman, this is what is concerning members of this committee and others about BP's response here, because you had executives who have sat here and said that we will pay for all reasonable costs incurred. But then when we ask direct questions, for example, about health care costs, you evade the questions. And all I want to know is, as part of the reimbursement of all reasonable costs, health care costs that are incurred by workers and residents of the Gulf. It's not a difficult question, sir.
I believe that if they are a direct consequence of the oil spill, then the independent adjudicator will find them to be claims that are legitimate under.
And would you support that, sir?
I clearly would. But
Thank you very much.
But it is.
Thank you very much
It is
for your
for the
comment.
independent adjudicator to make the decisions. That is what we've tried to create.
Well, just.
Okay. Members are going to have 10 minutes, 10 days to submit additional questions if they will, okay? Because, I mean, we could go here all night, and I'm sure people would like to. But that concludes all of our...
Mr. Chairman, I do want to ask one last question. On the letter that you, Mr. Waxman...
June 14th letter, yes.
June 14th letter, that, and Mr. Hayward, you indicated that you were briefed on this letter from Mr. Waxman and Mr. Stupak. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there any part of this letter that you actually dispute? I know you wouldn't really answer Mr. Waxman's questions, but are there parts of this letter that you actually do not agree with?
I think it's a statement of your conclusions at this time, which...
But do you dispute the facts as stated in the letter?
I don't dispute any of the facts, not any of the facts. And as I've said all along, I would like to await drawing conclusions until all of the investigations are complete.
If there are facts that you dispute, if you would provide those to us within the...
I certainly will.
I'm sorry, but I have to call this to an end, because then down on this side, you're going to want more questions, and I'll want more questions, and we'll be here till at least midnight, and we're not going to do that.
That's why we're the most important committee in Congress.
I agree, we're the most important committee in Congress, but even important things must come to an end. And right now, it's coming to an end. Mr. Hayward, I want to thank you, and thank you for being here today. You did come voluntarily, and we appreciate that. However, I will think it's fair to say that members are frustrated because the answers we've heard time and time again are phrases like, I wasn't involved in that decision, I don't know, I can't recall. We need to wait for the results of the investigation. And we had really hoped by giving you information and the June 14th letter, you'd be better prepared to answer our questions. I think the evasiveness of your answers only served to increase the frustration, not decrease the frustration, not just of members of Congress, but of that of the American people. So I'll thank you for being here. This is going to conclude our hearing. I want to thank all members for participating. The document binder is made part of the record, and that concludes our hearing. This meeting of the subcommittee is adjourned.
We'll see if he doesn't stay back.
So as you can see, this day-long House Energy Subcommittee hearing with BP CEO Tony Hayward wrapping up. Mr. Hayward was questioned at length by members of this large committee, and he apologized for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill while offering condolences to the family members of those who died in the explosion. Several members accused the BP CEO of dodging questions, but Mr. Hayward said he was, quote, devastated with this accident and that he was not stonewalling members' questions. In case you missed any part of this hearing, C-SPAN plans to re-air it tonight in its entirety beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll begin by showing you about a 20-minute portion of the highlights of the hearing, followed by the entire event. So this wraps up C-SPAN 3's live coverage of this hearing, and now we'll take you